Jigsaw's infamous bathroom game didn't play out quite like he drew it up in his plans. To hear about the key detail that could have changed everything, stick around to the end of this video. This video is sponsored by the CZsWorld merch store. Welcome to another episode of Things You Missed. This week, I want to play a game. So we'll be covering the first major motion picture from James Wan. I feel like I've talked a lot about Wan's work here on the channel, and I have talked about his franchises before, but this is actually the first time I've done a Things You Missed specifically on a film that he directed. So the clock is ticking, let's let the game begin. The first item of note comes in before the movie even starts when we see the Twisted Pictures logo animation. The company was started in order to produce Saw, and the intro is inspired by the razor wire trap, which is the second trap in the movie, where a man named Paul is asked to climb out of a cage riddled with barbed wire and cut himself in order to escape. The movie itself opens by showing us a little light floating around in the bathtub. We don't know what it is yet, but if you look very closely, it's attached to the key to Adam's shackle, which goes down the drain, which opens up when he wakes up in a panic. In Saw 3, we find out that it was Amanda who placed the key there, and I think she was supposed to put it somewhere else to give Adam a chance to get it. This means that the game was designed with the possibility of Adam being able to walk freely around the bathroom, and there's more evidence of this later on. Dr. Gordon is already awake at the beginning of the movie, and he demonstrates the reason that Jigsaw tested him, his lack of passion for life, in his opening dialogue.
You're not dead.
Who's that?
No point in yelling. I already tried.
He sounds defeated. He sounds like he doesn't care if he lives or dies. The goal of Jigsaw's game was basically to change that, to enlighten these prisoners on the joys of life. To symbolize this enlightenment, we see a big booming shot of the overhead lights, literally turning on above them. This would also allow the glow-in-the-dark paint to begin to charge. The bathroom itself is very strange. It's a dilapidated men's room, but with no dividers. It looks commercial. There are multiple toilets, sinks, and showers, so the inclusion of a bathtub is strange. I think the bathtub represents Jigsaw's idea of rebirth. Adam awakes from it and is thrust into the cold reality of the bathroom, just as we are born from the womb into the harsh actuality of our world. We later learn that the bathroom is located in a tunnel network underground. John was once an engineer for low-income living solutions, so I wonder if the bathroom was once part of some kind of communal shelter. However, the sign seen in the tunnels at the end of the movie says "Caution, raw sewage," so perhaps the bathroom was connected to some kind of sewage treatment center. When Adam first noticed John hiding in plain sight, pretending to be dead, he ironically makes an observation.
First dead body I've ever seen. Different in real life. They don't move.
Which is a nice touch considering what happens in the final scene and really adds to Adam's sense of terror. After beginning to solve the clues of the game, Adam obtains the tape recorder and puts in his tape.
If anyone ever uses the excuse, it's just a game, I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm gonna lose, like, are you kidding me? You're so stupid. And anyone that ever uses the excuse it's just a game is a horrible human being and is lazy.
I don't get it.
There is a little clue left on Dr. Gordon's tape about the identity of Jigsaw. Let's roll that clip.
Left to do. You shoot yourself.
The coughing alludes to the fact that Gordon already knows the killer, or at least he would have if he had taken the time to appreciate the human side of his dying patients.
His name is John. Dr. Gordon. He's a very interesting person.
The other clue whispered at the end of the tape, "Follow your heart," leads Adam to find the hacksaws. As the audience, we can see that there's something else in the bag, the photos that Adam had taken of Dr. Gordon, but Gordon himself cannot see them. Gordon eventually realizes that he and Adam may have been placed in the bathroom by Jigsaw, the unknown serial killer that Dr. Gordon was once a suspect for. The cops who questioned him are Stephen Singh and David Tapp, and we see a flashback of their first encounters at Jigsaw crime scenes. They're introduced to the remains of Paul by Allison Carey. One thing that I found interesting is that her badge says she's the deputy coroner. In Saw 2, she's a homicide detective for the newly formed serial killer task force, so that tells me that the loss of Detectives Singh and Tapp resulted in her getting a promotion. There's also some important information on the evidence bag telling us the date that Paul was found was March 19th, 2004. This is shortly before a 6-month time skip, which lands the date of the bathroom game somewhere in October of 2004, which is also when Saw was released. We're first introduced to who John Kramer actually is in Gordon's flashback at the hospital, and John has openly displayed his design sketch for the reverse bear trap on the table. Just like for anyone to see while he's asleep, I guess. I mean, if you're gonna be a serial killer, maybe don't do that, but just a suggestion, if you do, you might wanna hide the evidence just a little bit. I mean, there's also a green X on the opposite page, perhaps symbolic of the X marks the spot from the bathroom game. Gordon ends up being cleared as a suspect, but sticks around to hear the testimony of the first survivor, Amanda, who tells the story of how she woke up in a room and a tape started playing.
Hello, Amanda.
The 9th movie is called Spiral, and the name draws inspiration from the spirals on the cheeks of Billy the Puppet, and later the large spiral seen in John's workshop at the mannequin factory. The spiraling camera movement when John is first shown on screen, you know, the one where he's pretending to be dead, could also be a connection. When Amanda goes to try to retrieve the key to the reverse bear trap, there's a secret message from Jigsaw hidden on the wall. If you pause at just the right moment, you can read it. The message on the wall in Amanda's cell reads, "If you try to keep your life for yourself, you will lose it. But if you can give your life to me, you will find true life." This message doesn't seem to apply to Amanda, but it may have been part of a previous game for a man described as being her cellmate, Donnie Greco. Donnie doesn't seem to have much of a chance to survive. He is essentially neutralized when Amanda is forced to cut through his stomach in order to retrieve her key. But Jigsaw always believes in giving his victims a second chance. So I think Donnie already lost his game, and his punishment was that he would now die in Amanda's game. This message was probably part of the rules for Donnie's first game. When Amanda cuts open his stomach, the camera cuts to a shadow on the wall, a reference to a technique seen in early German Expressionism films, like one of the earliest influential horror movies ever, Nosferatu. I should also note that many of the stylish techniques used in Nosferatu were done to save money, as Germany was still picking up the pieces from World War I at the time that it was made. Saw was also made for a very low budget, but rather than picking up the pieces from World War I, the producers of Saw were picking up the pieces of a second mortgage that they had to put on their production headquarters, and luckily for them, Saw ended up being very successful and spawning many sequels. While those sequels may not have been planned from the beginning, I'd still like to point out something that I found interesting about Lawrence Gordon's home. This will contain spoilers for the series, so skip ahead 20 seconds if you haven't seen the rest of the movies. Gordon has this clock in his living room with these little ornaments that look vaguely like Jigsaw puzzle pieces. This gear could also represent the idea of mechanical engineering. As you may know, Jigsaw was once a civil engineer, and I like to think that these could be little clues that Lawrence Gordon would one day make the perfect successor to Jigsaw. There are clocks all over Gordon's house, including both an hourglass and analog clock on his desk, and that all ties into part of the reason behind Jigsaw's work: time. All of this starts when John finds out from Dr. Gordon how much time he has to live. When he learns that, he learns how valuable his time on Earth really is. Back in the present, at the bathroom, Dr. Gordon tells Adam about his favorite picture of his family, which all three of them are in, rare because someone usually has to take the photo. The shot is missing from his wallet, but I think we actually do see it in his living room if you pause during the chase at the end of the movie. I mean, it makes sense considering that this family just seems to keep reusing the same few photos all over the place, over and over and over. The next flashback shows Gordon putting his daughter to bed, and he tries to calm her fears by doing the "this little piggy" nursery rhyme with her. In John Kramer's MO, pigs represent rebirth. That's why all of his followers don the pig masks when carrying out tasks for Jigsaw. After he leaves, his daughter sees Zepp hiding in the closet, in what almost certainly seems to be an homage to that scene from Black Christmas. Roll it. Meanwhile, Detective Tapp has been unable to accept Lawrence Gordon's innocence even after the doctor provides an alibi, and spies on him from a messy apartment across the way. What I cannot answer is why Detective Tapp has Amy's coffee though. What have you done to Amy, Detective Tapp?
What are you doing to them, you bastard?
Yeah, the apartment is a mess, and the walls are covered in reconnaissance photos of the doctor and newspaper headlines about the Jigsaw murders. Surprisingly, none of the names or authors mentioned in these articles are Easter eggs or references to anything. There is one connection that would be made retroactively when Saw the video game was released in 2009. The author of this article is Oswald McGillicuddy, a name that was given to the journalist character that you save in the game, although the game is not considered canon. The actual contents of the article, as we often see in movies, have nothing to do with the headline. This one's about a toy called Goofy Clay that exploded and destroyed a trailer home in Reno. The only other semi-interesting tidbit I found about these headlines was this article, which references Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which doesn't really have anything to do with Saw, but is just a well-respected movie in general. There would be a more meaningful reference shortly after, when Singh and Tapp discover the location of Jigsaw's hideout. The map they use doesn't seem to correlate to any real-world locations that I could find on Google Maps, but they end up determining that the fire alarm heard in the tape must have been from an emergency at 213 Stygian Street. Stygian Street is a reference to James Wan's first independent film, Stygian, and the address number, 213, is a reference to the area code of Lacey Production Center, where Saw was filmed. When they arrived there, the workshop contained a miniature version of the bathroom, but Dr. Gordon's shackle is replaced with an electrical wire, which is connected to this battery. This is perhaps our first clue about the electric shock component connected to each of their chains. Jigsaw first used this on Adam to ensure that he wasn't cheating, then on Gordon to try to snap him out of his miserable wallowing. and then again on Adam to make him drop the gun he was holding. And then on the audience, because the ending was such a shocking twist. Yeah, okay, I'll go off myself for that pun. John's workshop also provided another clue about the true method that Adam could have used to win and survive the bathroom game. The reason that the miniature version of the bathroom contains figures to represent Gordon and Jigsaw but not Adam could be because when we see this, it's still 6 months before the game takes place, and Adam had not yet been hired to photograph Gordon, and so was not yet a target of John Kramer. However, it's clear that the game only works with the second player, so I think the fact that we don't see Adam in this diagram is because of what I mentioned near the beginning of this video. Adam was supposed to have an opportunity to retrieve his key and have the ability to free roam around the bathroom, and possibly escape. Now, I'm not saying he was definitely supposed to get out of his shackle, otherwise why bother with the whole electric shock component, but it seems like the freedom to move about may have been something that Adam could have earned. Also, this may be the same miniature used by the set designers of the movie when they created the actual bathroom, because it actually says Saw bathroom set right here. Guess we can call this James Wan's coffee cup moment. Zepp watches the game unfold from a little area set up within Gordon's home. I noticed there's a microphone there, which makes me wonder if there was ever supposed to be an aspect of the game where Zepp communicates with them directly. Or maybe Zepp was just planning on starting a little podcast. The Jigsaw Victim Podcast. Let's see if can top that, Bobby Dagan. Zepp watches as Gordon discovers the hidden box containing the phone, causing him to remember the night that he was captured, and every time I watch it, it makes me crazy. I mean, why would Adam, who is trying to secretly spy on Dr. Gordon, use the flash while taking photos of him? I mean, that makes no sense. That's just the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I'm sorry, but you're an idiot, Adam. You're an idiot.
You know who I am.
Lawrence becomes more and more suspicious of Adam's secrets, and rightfully so, and asks what else he may be hiding.
Well, let's see. On my 6th birthday, my best friend at the time, Scott Tibbs, stabbed me with a rusty nail. I didn't tell you about that.
Now on the DVD for Saw 2, there's a bonus video called the Scott Tibbs documentary, which is a found footage short created by Scott.
I had to find out more. So I acquired this sweet little camera, and I'm making my own documentary about this sick f***er. Scott Tibbs style, baby.
Yeah, it's not very good. Okay, it's kind of one of the most embarrassing things I've seen a professional film studio put out, and it's considered to be non-canon to the Saw story. But I did want to bring it up because the character Scott himself is still canon. When it comes down to the end of the game, Lawrence finally caves in, saws off his foot, gets the bullet and the gun, but decides to try the play dead trick with Adam one last time. This attempt was a little bit smarter because it didn't require any acting ability on Adam's part. We all know how that turned out last time. I think Lawrence gives the signal when the camera cuts back to his head right here, when he probably winks at Adam. The play dead trick also calls back to earlier in the film where Jigsaw does the same thing to trick Singh. The movie ends with Gordon passing the test and Adam failing to achieve his enlightenment, and as a result, Jigsaw locks him away in the dark.
Game over.
Director James Wan would step away from the Saw franchise after the first film and open the door.
Somebody open the f***ing door!
For a new face to take the reins on the series. So Saw 2 would be directed by Darren Lynn Bousman. Bousman would head up the next 3 movies and establish most of what we think of when we think of Saw today. I'd consider the Saw saga to be more his product than any other director, and he would return to direct the 9th installment, Spiral. With the new director came some new things you missed, so grab your magnifying glass and let's get into them. The movie opens the same way that the first did, with a light. We see a bare light bulb come in and out of focus, and it suddenly shines very bright. In the first Saw, I said that the light represented Jigsaw, trying to enlighten his test subjects and make them see the error of their ways. That concept took more of a center stage in Saw 2, making this an appropriate opening. Some of John's trap designs throughout the Saw series took ancient torture devices and enhanced them with industrial advances. One example is the first trap of the movie, the Venus flytrap, which drew inspiration from the medieval contraption, the Iron Maiden. Only this was more like a cute little Iron Maiden for your face. When the victim watches his tape, the assistant seen on screen has a bit of a limp. There's a slight hobble to his step. If you've seen the twist at the end of Saw 7, you now know why. If you're about to correct me and say it's called Saw 3D or Saw the Final Chapter, save your breath. I prefer to call it Saw 7. Soon after, we meet Eric Matthews, who is going to pick up his son Daniel, who'd been caught shoplifting at an electronics store. During the scene, the camera cuts away to a shot of a security camera, which shows us the reason that Daniel is so familiar with security technology later on.
Those types of cameras don't have sound.
And more importantly, establish one of the main concepts of Jigsaw's next game. Part of what makes the twist work is the fact that we, as the audience, believe that what we're seeing on the monitors is a live feed. On a side note, this is one of the only movies to establish a relationship that we care about, the father-son dynamic between Eric and Daniel, before they both get tangled up with Jigsaw, and it goes a long way to help make this the most powerful entry in the series on an emotional level. Eric is called in to see the Jigsaw crime scene that we saw in the opening because the killer has called out Detective Matthews. Or rather, Detective Matthews. As brilliant as Jigsaw may have been, it looks like he still struggles with spelling. We know that the double T's is the correct spelling because that's how the names appear in the end credits. When Eric is back at the police station, many notices and wanted posters cover the walls, while the shelves are filled with binders and boxes of evidence files. One of these boxes is for a case about a victim named Greg Copeland, a reference to the co-producer of Bousman's initial 3 Saw films, who also served as a production manager and second unit director. Another box in that room lists a victim named Charlie Taylor, who was the film's weapons wrangler. After Matthews has the realization about the location of Jigsaw's hideouts, the SWAT team makes an entrance strategy on the whiteboard, which involved several smaller teams of men. The first team consisted of Black, Faulkner, Wisman, and Brady, which corresponded to electrician Craig Black, key grip Chris Faulkner, or possibly his brother Tyler, first assistant editor Ron Wisman Jr., and the art director Michelle Brady. Okay, enough of that boring stuff. You know shit's about to go down when Jigsaw puts away his cereal. The main game of Saw 2 is the nerve gas house, where 8 criminals must solve puzzles to win the antidotes to the poison being pumped in through the ventilation system. From what I've heard, the original scripts of the film have detailed the specific traps set for each character, but the final cut only shows the location of 5 antidotes. The one in the safe in the room that they start off in, the 2 in the furnace trap, the 1 in the needle pit, and the 1 in the razor box. Of those 5, only 1 game was played by the test subject it was intended for, which was Abby, who was challenged to go into the furnace trap. According to the director's commentary, the razor box trap was intended for Gus, who doesn't make it that far because he falls victim to the magnum eye hole very early on. Normally I wouldn't consider the information on the commentary track canon, so I wouldn't include something like that in my things you missed, but we do see that Gus is a businessman and the trap seems to have been created to punish greed. It's not hard to imagine that Gus was chosen by Jigsaw because of corporate greed. We more or less find out why Addison was chosen in Saw 4, and the razor box trap doesn't seem to fit the bill for prostitution. So who were the other antidotes supposed to go to? In my headcanon, the second needle in Abby's trap would have gone to Daniel, since he's just a kid and you know all the usual cliches about him having his whole life ahead of him and stuff. I'm not saying that the other prisoners would have let that happen, but I think that's how Jigsaw drew up the game. The only other one that we know for a fact is the needle pit trap, which was intended for Xavier, but he ends up throwing Amanda into the pit to do the task for him. Speaking of which, I think we can subtract 1 because it seems pretty clear that because Amanda was in on the game, she had already been treated. This is supported by the fact that she never runs out of breath or spits up blood as the others do. So that leaves Laura, Addison, and Jonas. I think that the antidote in the safe would have been for Jonas because he seems most interested in solving the riddle that Jigsaw left for them on the tape, so it's likely that John knew that he liked puzzles and that would essentially become his task. So that just leaves Addison and Laura. There are plenty of locked rooms in the corridors that we never see the inside of, and some of them seem to just open on their own once a certain amount of time has elapsed, but neither of these characters lived long enough to make it to their tests. While we don't see the inside of their rooms in the movie, we can learn about the traps that may have been inside them if we take a closer look at the design sketches pinned up all over Jigsaw's workshop. John Kramer's headquarters at the Wilson Steel plant seem to be his go-to spot for research and development. Taking a look around, the place is covered with blueprints, design sketches, and prototypes for traps, which were tested on the mannequins scattered around the facility, which were probably brought over from his previous workshop at Stygian Street, whose location had been compromised by Detective Tapp in 2004. These designs include previous traps, like the original reverse bear trap, which we saw Amanda tested on in the first movie, or the Venus flytrap from the opening of this movie. Many of the sketches represent the traps at the nerve gas house, like the razor box and the magnum eye hole. If those are present, chances are we can also see the 2 unseen traps from the nerve gas house, the ones intended for Laura and Addison. There are a number of traps that can be seen in the workshop that don't correspond to any trap that's used during the series, like this one, which appears to be some kind of skull cage, possibly with the intention of impaling the victim's head. Another variation on the idea shows up later and looks to introduce an electric shock component to the design. Another design shows us some kind of gas mask with a switch on the front. When we see more concept sketches later, one of them is labeled as the toxin table. though it is not known if that is meant to be used in conjunction with the gas mask. This thing may or may not be the toxin table. Assuming the gas mask and the toxin table do go together though, I'd guess this is the trap for Addison. I can see there being some kind of analogy being made, with toxins being compared to disease and the gas mask being compared to protection as it pertains to the corner girl lifestyle. We don't ever find out why Laura is tested by Jigsaw, but she would have the last trap by default, be it the electric skull cage thing or one of these other prototypes. Another possibility is this football helmet one, but there isn't any evidence of John getting started with any preliminary designs on that. There are other trap designs that I think may be very early versions of some of the other devices John would use later in his career. Would you call serial killing a career? I mean, I guess in his case it's more of a retirement plan.
Hello, investment firms. I see that you fraudulently mishandled funds for my 401k. I can't do this.
But yeah, right here I noticed a trap that looks to be some kind of spinal cord device, which reminded me of the spine cutter trap that Art Blank had to wear in Saw 4. There was also this mannequin with a series of tubes running from the head, and I have to wonder if that would be related to the oxygen crusher that eventually appeared in Saw 6. Outside of what we actually see in John's workshop, there is also a moment that I believe inspired future traps in the series. When John is talking to Detective Matthews, he describes the moment that his mission truly began, when he tried to take himself out Bill Murray Groundhog Day style. And the way he describes what he felt is an important step in how he came to believe that his traps would cause people to appreciate life. Roll it off the side of a cliff.
But to my amazement, I was alive. And I was determined to spend the rest of my days testing the fabric of human nature.
The obvious trap idea to come out of this would be the horsepower trap from Saw 7, where one of the victims experiences a car crash from the same perspective that John would have when he threw his vehicle into autopilot, but there was no autopilot because it was the mid-90s. But after the crash, John can be seen pulling these stakes out of his body. And I think that's what gave him the idea for the spike trap, which he would use in Saw 4? Guys, I am so good at reading Roman numerals. As this seems to be the part of the experience that really made him feel alive. But enough about the traps, let's talk about the game.
This whole house is a trap!
Touche. At the very beginning, Amanda is asleep, face down on the floor like she's some kind of Taking Back Sunday lyric. Though if anyone's a lyric in this movie, it's Rig. Amanda, who would be the facilitator of the game at the Nerve Gas house, starts off in the exact same position that John Kramer did when he facilitated the bathroom game a year prior. Eric's son Daniel is wearing some band merch for a group called Wrath of the Gods. Scott's band in that documentary is none other than Wrath of the Gods.
Hey, Scott Tibbs, lead guitar. Found out Wrath of the Gods.
I said that the Scott Tibbs documentary was non-canon, but after watching it again, there isn't really anything that contradicts the movies, so I'm not sure why Saw fans consider it to be non-canon. I think it's just because they don't like it. But outside of Daniel's Wrath of the Gods shirt being a reference to Scott Tibbs, it also represents the cult of Jigsaw, who would come to see himself as a god. So you could say that he brought his wrath down upon his many victims. This wrath would not extend to Daniel himself though, and Jigsaw gives a couple of little clues towards the boy being safe, or at least being in a safe.
Tell me where he is.
He's in a safe place.
Also, later on, when he promises Eric that if he follows the rules he'll see his son again, he darts his eyes down towards where the safe is.
If you agree to that, then you will see your son again.
These clues, given audibly by Jigsaw, aren't the only hints that what the police are seeing on the screens isn't taking place in real time. If we look at some more of the background details of the workshop, we can find even more evidence. When police discover the numbers counting down next to the monitors, they assume that it's a bomb, and later decide that it's probably a countdown to the end of the Nerve Gas game. However, if you do the math, which normally I don't like to do, but we'll make an exception for you, the viewers, the timer has over 4 hours to go, whereas the game was only supposed to last 2 to 3 hours.
3 hours from now, the door to this house will open. Unfortunately, you only have 2 hours to live.
There are also a few items seen in both the Nerve Gas house and the Wilson steel plant. Items don't typically exist in 2 places at once. What I'm getting at is the events taking place on the computer screens cannot be taking place at the same time as the police raid. The wheelchair with the mannequin upon which the note for Abby is found can be seen in the room with the monitors. The tricycle that Billy the puppet used to greet the police when they first arrived at the steel plant is also present in the hallway over at the house, and the X marks the spot painting can be seen hanging in the background in Jigsaw's workshop. Earlier I mentioned briefly how Jigsaw developed a god God complex, and this painting has a very biblical look to it, like something you might find in a church. He probably does consider his workshops to be his churches, going so far as to light candles to perform a ceremony on Amanda in Saw 3. The signal traced by the Metropolitan Police's tech team leads them back to a different house, where Rigg hits pause in the VCR to determine that the game that they had been watching on the screens all along was already over. One question you might have had is where Jigsaw is getting all of these empty houses and buildings. Fans of the franchise know that John Kramer was once involved in a project called the Urban Renewal Group, which helps provide housing to low-income families, but he abandoned the endeavor halfway through. I think that the nerve gas house was going to be one of these homes, but John reinforced it to make it the setting of his game. The fake-out house was probably a replica or model home, which would explain why it has the same layout and why Jigsaw was able to trick the SWAT team. The twist in this movie works great because as the audience, we're on the same level as the protagonists, the police. We are being presented the events out of order because that's how they are perceiving the situation. We find out the truth as they find out. Whereas in a movie like Jigsaw, the story is told the way that it is just to trick the audience. There's no other practical reason for doing it that way, and it feels artificial. Another thing that Saw 2 gets right that you may not have thought about is the theming of the traps to fit the character who is playing them. For example, it seems the needle pit room was once a nursery. We see ABCs written on the walls, baby bottles, toys, carriages, and even creepy little infant mannequins. Xavier is revealed to have been a drug dealer who took advantage of his clients' addictions. When a junkie becomes addicted, their body becomes dependent on the drugs. Just as a baby in a nursery needs its parents to provide for it, the drug addicts need to keep crawling back to Xavier to get their fix. Desperation seems to be a key theme in the film. Had Abi not been so desperate to get both antidotes, he could have seen the nozzle to turn off the flames of the furnace trap with minimal burn damage. Had Addison not been in such a huge rush to obtain the antidote in the razor box, she might have noticed that it was already unlocked, which would allow her to open it up and get what she needs without putting her wrists in harm's way. And had everyone just taken a moment to sit down and think about the clues given by Jigsaw,
the numbers are in the back of your mind. The clue to their order can be found over the rainbow.
They could have figured out that each of them had numbers written on the back of their heads, each one with a different color of the rainbow. By arranging them in the order of Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, they would have obtained the combination to the safe. The big one, of course, is Eric Matthews, whose desperation to find his son led him back to the ways of police brutality. All he had to do to get his son back was sit there and talk with a Jigsaw. When the contestants of the game discover the X, they find the photo proving that Daniel Matthews is Eric Matthews' son. In the photo, they're at a New York Knicks game. While the location of the Saw movies is in an unnamed fictional city that's only ever nicknamed the Fairweather States, there are a lot of clues like this that it's supposed to be somewhere in the northeastern United States, like the license plates being very similar to New Jersey and the New York skyline in Spiral.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
About 73 minutes into Saw 2, there's this 3-minute stretch where there's just a whole bunch of horror references for some reason. It starts when the tech team discovers the location of the fake-out house, which is 237 North Hyde Crescent. 237 is an homage to the spookiest number in all of horror, Room 237 from The Shining. If you aren't a big fan of The Shining, you might think this is just a coincidence, but trust me when I say it's not. If you pay attention, you'll notice this number come up over and over again in all kinds of horror films. The way that Hyde is spelled makes me think it could be a nod to the classic novel Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Then there's another potential street name homage.
Make a run on Alfred!
It's a bit unusual to see a first name used as a street name like that, and the murder mystery house nature of Saw 2 leads me to believe that this was a reference to perhaps the most iconic horror director of all time, Alfred Hitchcock. Another iconic horror director was Wes Craven, and his 1972 film Last House on the Left would also be mentioned on this car ride.
It's the last house on the left.
After this, we see the conclusion of the Nerve Gas House game.
Come on, let me in! Let me in! Let me in!
As I mentioned in the last episode, one of the staples of the Saw franchise is that there's always a character who plays dead in order to get an upper hand. In this case, it's Daniel, who plays dead to get the jump on Xavier. I can't show that because it's too gory for YouTube, but look, someone finally flushed the toilet. And that's one of the last things that I'd like to compliment Saw 2 on. It decided which aspects of the first movie would become staples of the series and set the tone that would be used for the next 5 installments. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about this really being Darren Lynn Bousman's franchise. He departed after Saw 4, but handed the torch to the production designer that he brought on for his Saw movies, David Hackle. And David would hand it off to the series editor, Kevin Reuter, to finish it out. So the team was all together as early as Saw 2, part of the reason that the tone is consistent. Saw 2 would establish Bousman as a director, but the biggest box office success in the franchise would be his next endeavor, Saw 3. Saw 3 brought back a lot of characters from the first two movies. We got to see Rigg, Carrie, Matthews, and even Adam Stanheidt, who is played by the screenwriter Leigh Whannell. After writing the first two movies, Whannell would make Saw 3 his final installment before moving on to Dead Silence and Insidious. In one tweet, he hilariously claims that he'd prefer Saw 3 as the end of the series. To be honest, I think they should have ended it at 3. I'll admit it, I haven't even seen Saw 5 or 6. People ask me questions about Detective Hoffman, and I don't know what the they're talking about. Which is really funny because Leigh created the character of Hoffman. He shows up in Saw 3. There are a lot of clues in his story that leave the third film up for a sequel. I wonder what Leigh Whannell would say to that.
I'm a liar?
Just like the first two movies, Saw 3 opens with the lights. This time, it's the flashlight that Detective Matthews would try to use to make his way out of the nerve gas house. The first proper trap of the movie is the classroom trap, and we find out this one was never meant to be escapable, which doesn't fit Jigsaw's pattern. I guess Amanda didn't spend enough time in Jigsaw's workshop and spent a little bit too much time at Build-A-Bear workshop, because she didn't properly learn the rules for making a Jigsaw game. Then there's a curious line from Hoffman.
All he had to do was release himself from each of the chains, walk out the door before it went off. All he had to do?
At the time the line was written, it could have just been a red herring, but something later on in the film makes me think it was an intentional clue about Saw 4. It becomes clear to police that someone other than Jigsaw is holding traps when they find another inescapable one. No, Carrie, that's not what I meant when I said stream sniping. When I covered Saw 2, I mentioned how some of the traps draw inspiration from real-life torture devices in history. The Angel Trap seems to be a post-industrial revolution version of the Blood Eagle, a Viking execution ritual that severed the victims' ribs from their spines. The same thing happens to Detective Carrie after reaching into a beaker of acid to get the key.
All you have to do is reach in and take it.
Where have I heard that before? Towards the end of the movie, we see a prototype in John's work area that's never seen used on any victim in the series, but may have also been inspired by a historical torture mechanism, the strappado, an invention of the medieval Inquisition which left its victims suspended by ropes for extended periods of time to the point of body part dislocation or death. There was a third torture device inspired by real life in this film, but I'll come back to that later in this video. After seeing the fate of Carrie, we're introduced to this movie's main protagonist, a surgeon named Dr. Lynn Denlin. One of the big twists of this movie reveals that she's actually the wife of the man making his way through the trials at Gideon Meatpacking Plant. However, if we look back, there are plenty of clues. When we see her at the hospital, she's depressed, and the only thing that ends up springing her into action is when she sees that the patient is a child. Lynn was unable to do anything to save her and Jeff's child, Dylan, who is struck down by a drunk driver, so she probably couldn't bear to see another child slip away. Then, in her locker, there's a picture drawn for her by a child, but what we don't know at the time is that it's a keepsake from her lost son, Dylan. The drawing of the pig matches what was Dylan's favorite toy, a plush pig that looks like it could be from the other mother in Coraline.
We need a yes if you want to stay here.
So sharp you won't feel a thing.
Perhaps it should have been clear when Jeff makes his way through his trials, and at every step he's rewarded with a ripped piece of his family photo. The mom is deliberately kept from us until the end, moments before we discover that Lynn and Jeff are a married couple. But the hints about their relationship weren't the only windows into the events that would take place at the end of this movie. Another twist that takes place is the kidnapping of Jeff and Lynn's daughter, Corbett, to be used as motivation for a game for Jeff. In the scene where Jeff is kidnapped by Jigsaw's apprentice, there are also very short flashes of Corbett's face, suggesting that she too was taken in. Jigsaw explains the rules of the game to Jeff.
You will have to face a series of tests. You will have to suffer to move forward through each of them. You will finally come face to face with the man responsible for the loss of your child. That will be your ultimate test. Can you forgive him?
We assume that he's talking about Timothy, the drunk driver responsible for Dylan's death, but when Jigsaw says, "You will come face to face with the man responsible for the loss of your child," he's really talking about himself, the man responsible for Corbett's kidnapping. Jeff's final test is to try to forgive John Kramer, who put him through the whole day's worth of suffering. Corbett is locked away in an unknown location inside Gideon, a part of Jigsaw's plan that is perhaps hinted at by this sketch in the operating room of an eye looking through a keyhole. Could the key that Amanda wears throughout the movie, a key that we never learn the purpose of, possibly be the key that unlocks Corbett's cell? While following the pathways of Lynn and Jeff have led us to some things you missed, the biggest revelations will come when we take a look at this game's main test subject, Amanda. The true surprise of Saw 3 was the deception of Amanda's status as a facilitator of the game rather than a player. The final scene reveals that Jigsaw was really looking at her when he began the game, but the rules can apply to both Lynn and Amanda.
You're being tested. tested, your will is being tested. Your will to keep someone alive.
In a flashback, we see Amanda surviving the reverse bear trap from the first movie, after which Jigsaw takes her for her rebirth. There are a couple items in Amanda's room within the Gideon meatpacking plant that symbolize this, like this Botticelli painting titled The Birth of Venus, and a Jigsaw puzzle piece. Amanda supposedly has the survival instinct that Jigsaw victims lacked. The failed subjects had their piece taken from them, while Amanda got to keep hers. Police figured out that the traps at the beginning are unwinnable, and I mentioned back in my Saw 1 episode that I think Adam's chain was tampered with as well. We see the bathroom game being set up in a flashback in Saw 3, and Amanda tosses Adam's key into the bath while John is not looking. I think the key was supposed to be somewhere where Adam had a chance to get it, giving him the ability to roam around the bathroom by undoing his shackle. In the montage at the end, Amanda's placement of the key is accompanied by the narration, "Your games were unwinnable."
Your games were unwinnable.
There's also a point where John is speaking to Lynn Denlin about his moral values and sheds light on the reason that we would eventually find out for Amanda being tested once again.
I don't condone murder, and I despise murderers.
Which is a fine stance to have, but you have to apply it to yourself as well.
I'm a murderer.
John should be holding himself accountable for the deaths of the victims that he put into his many traps, so let's take a closer look at those. If you ask me though, Jeff is going the wrong way here. I mean, I'd be headed towards those fresh and frozen beef products. When he arrives at the pig vat trap, the judge just won't stop running his mouth, to the point he started to sound like a talkative video game NPC.
Who was that? Karitushka?
Telemarketer.
This trap is clever though, because it's more of an emotional suffering that takes place, whereas the others focus on physical pain. I think it's the only trap in the series so far that's like that. It's also pretty metal. Drowning in the guts of a dead, rotted animal.
I hate to say it, but
Yeah, not to be contradictory, but it's very metal.
The challenge is for Jeff to burn his late son's possessions to obtain a key that will free the judge from being drowned in pig guts. The key is hidden in Dylan's favorite toy, which was a pig. As I mentioned before, pigs represent rebirth, because the year of the pig in the Chinese zodiac is associated with the concept of being reborn. For Jigsaw, being reborn is the idea of leaving your past life behind and coming to appreciate and cherish the joy of being alive. So that's why there are pigs all over this movie. I already mentioned Dylan's drawing inside of Lynn's locker. There's also these little porkers up here, the pig masks worn by John's disciples, these guys in the operation room, and the pig hidden at the top of Jeff's study. Let's move on to the next trap. What was the point of that? This trap is another example of a trap that's based off of a real-world torture device from history, but this one you're probably familiar with. The cross has long been a religious symbol for some, but it gets its shape from the ancient punishment known as crucifixion. Looking at the rack makes me think of a more technologically advanced crucifix. I've talked a little bit about how John tries to make his following very cult-like, but he doesn't just draw influence from one religion. There are also what I believe to be Buddhist figures with him by his deathbed, and I've also heard that the spirals that he's incorporated into much of his work have connections to Buddhism as well. I think that the imagery connected to the cult of Jigsaw doesn't stop with religion though. He's also taken ideas from other cultures, like how we see the Chinese concept of yin and yang referenced right here, and he also has illustrations of the solar system, because there are certain cultures who put a lot of significance on the solar calendar. I see the Jigsaw cult as kind of a melting pot of different religions and cultures, with an emphasis on suffering to find enlightenment. Jigsaw wears robes resembling those of a monk in the scene where Amanda is reborn. The room is lit by candlelight, and the music that plays is titled Baptism in the official score. One more note on the rack though. Rather than having the feet together like you typically see on a crucifix, the feet are apart, like the second position seen on Leonardo da Vinci's famous drawing, The Vitruvian Man, which happens to be posted up all over the operating room where that part of John's game takes place. Right about now you're probably thinking that this Jigsaw guy is really sharp, the kind of guy that's so smart he wears the watch on the inside of his wrist. Only problem is you might want to turn on your camera there. Okay, Boomer? Unlike Saw 2, there's only one horror reference I caught in this one, and keep in mind, when you see this Annabelle doll, this was years before The Conjuring or Annabelle came out, so this is a reference to the actual real-life creepy doll that those movies are based on, if that. One person who definitely left hints at what would follow, despite saying it should have ended after Saw 3, was the screenwriter Leigh Whannell. The first hint was early on in the movie when John Kramer discusses his relationship with Dr. Gordon.
I was his patient and he was mine.
Interesting choice of words, but it also seems like the original plan for Jeff was to have him survive and play another game in Saw 4. As I discussed, the ending alludes to a game where he has to save his daughter.
I am the person responsible for the loss of your child. I am the only person who knows where your daughter is.
Jigsaw also gives a cryptic warning, telling Jeff that it would be dangerous to try to move his dying wife.
Though you may not see any threat, there are threats all around you.
In Saw 3, we don't really have any idea what he means by this, but in Saw 4, we would meet the threats that approached just beyond that door. Obviously, the storyline did change in the year that would follow to where Jeff was no longer the focus, but you're not off the hook just yet, Leigh Whannell. Remember that tweet? I find it a little suspicious that Hoffman was introduced in Saw 3, left as one of the only survivors, and that this shot, which has nothing to do with Saw 3, was added to kickstart the beginning of Saw 4. The opening trap of Saw 4 takes place in a mausoleum, and some of the tomb markers are named after the crew members who helped make the movie, like the art department's painter, Napoleon Forbes, the carpenters Hubert Peddle and Brian Lumley, and a miscellaneous crew member named Chris Becker. It makes sense to see carpenters and painters immortalize themselves on the physical set, while someone like the graphic designer, Sean Schofield, got his own name in there on this fingerprint analysis report. The head of the forensics department is listed as David Armstrong, who happens to be Saw 4's director of photography, which is also considered to be the head of the camera department and electric department on a movie. There's also some information on this report that answers a previously unsolved mystery about Saw 2, so stick around if you want to hear about it. Saw 4 represents a transition for the Saw franchise. After the departure of the original writer, this would be the last Saw movie that director Darren Lynn Bousman would direct for the next 13 years. But the producers obviously wanted to keep the series going, and as a result, Saw started to become more episodic. The movie would contain setups that might not pay off for another 2 or 3 movies, and some of them are pretty well-kept secrets. The film opens with John Kramer's autopsy. If only this guy knew how valuable that mask would become in 2020. And the scene sets up for the big twist of this movie. The fact that the autopsy is actually the last scene chronologically, and Saw 4 takes place at the same time as Saw 3. The tape in John's stomach is played for Detective Hoffman, and you can fully expect a YouTube video from me in about 70 years with a similar message.
You think it's over just because I'm dead? I promise that my work will continue.
Despite this twist being a surprise to most, we are constantly shown that time is an important factor in Saw 4. From the ancient clock that John emphasizes to Jill, to the watch he angrily throws away after losing their unborn son, to the countdown that looms over this movie's main game, to the theme of this game being about time and patience.
Time was on your side, but your obsession wouldn't let you wait.
To the many lessons that John teaches his victims also being about time.
Give me time to explain, please.
I can't give you time. No one can. Time's an illusion.
But outside of the concept of time, there are also a lot of clues that the events of Saw 3 had not yet taken place. Like the fact that outside of that opening flash forward scene, there's no mention of John and Amanda's death, and the most recent headlines we see are all about the events of Saw 2. Like this one that says detective and serial killer still missing, a reference to Matthews and John literally dipping out so that John can take the detective to the nerve gas house. Also, the photos on the left side are all photos of John's workshop at Wilson Steel Plant. If this was taking place after John Kramer's autopsy, they would also have photos from the operation room. This magazine cover has an article about Detective Matthews in relation to Jigsaw, but nothing about Dr. Denlin, who, by the way, is mentioned offhand in the movie, but we don't know that it's her at the time.
Boss, looks like another doctor went missing from the hospital. I think maybe it's,
Thanks.
When I heard this line, I thought he was saying another doctor as in another doctor in addition to Dr. Denlin, but it was really another doctor in addition to Dr. Gordon. Shortly after, Hoffman is seen holding a children's toy. When asked about it by Agent Perez, he simply says,
"It's a short story, believe me."
Which is not a lie, but if we look closely at it, it's actually one of the toys that belongs to Corbett Denlin, the kidnapped daughter from Saw 3. And the Saw 3 connections really don't let up, because Saw 4 straight up shows us Hoffman placing a note for Amanda in the middle drawer of John's desk, which is a connection to this line from the previous movie.
In my desk, in the center drawer, an envelope, your name on it.
It seems that Darren Lynn Bousman, who I apparently can't talk about at all without saying his full first, middle, and last name, was so confident that we wouldn't notice these details that he straight up put the date that this all takes place on, April 28th, 2006. While we don't see the exact date in Saw 3, we know that it can't be that long after Saw 2, where John Kramer was
damn near on his deathbed the last time we saw him.
We also know Saw 4 takes place 6 months after Saw 2.
Eric's been missing for 6 months. Kerry was gone for 4 days.
So the timeline checks out. It makes sense that 3 and 4 are taking place on the same day. Also, the date helps timeline-obsessed people such as myself confirm when Saw 2 actually takes place, because Saw 4 is stated to be 6 months after the disappearance of Eric Matthews. Previously, we could only estimate that Saw 2 took place in October 2005 based on the decomposition of Adam and Zepp's bodies in the bathroom. They look like they've been rotting for about a year. But now we have something more concrete, and it fits right in with this newspaper headline stating that the police have released the identity of Jigsaw, and it's published on November 30th. It makes sense that they would keep it under wraps after first discovering that John Kramer was Jigsaw, but after losing him and being unable to find him for the next month, they would release his identity to the public. Also, the writer of this article is Jane Kim, the assistant of Darren Lynn Bousman on this movie. There's another article written later on by Jason Lunn, the lead man of the art department. Of course, the big clue where I think most of us started to realize that Saw 4 took place alongside the third installment was at the end, when Agent Strom shows up at the Gideon meatpacking plant and finds the photo of Jeff's family seen in the previous film. Then there's more of Jeff abusing the lights for some reason. He really does not like lights, does he? So there's a lot of evidence to look back on that proves Saw 4's timeline placement. And while Saw 4 isn't among my favorite Saw movies, I think there's something that I like about giving an iconic entry in a franchise multiple direct sequels. It reminds me of the Legend of Zelda franchise, where they came out with this legendary game, Ocarina of Time, and gave one sequel in the timeline branch where Link is a child, and one sequel in the timeline branch he abandoned as an adult. But the interesting thing about Saw 4 is it not only moves us forward in the timeline, but also flashes us back to John Kramer's past, where we can discover even more things you missed. When Officer Rigg is watching back the Jill Tuck interrogation tapes, he does so on reference monitor B at the police station. We can also see there's another monitor on this cart, but the label says 9-inch HD monitor. Sometimes in the movie industry you can get away with using equipment as props, and this is probably one of those cases. In fact, it happens a lot in Saw 4, like later on at Rigg's house, and maybe here at the ice block trap, although it's possible that these light panels were never supposed to be on screen. When you make 7 movies in 7 years, that's the kind of mistake that can happen. When we first see the newspaper article about John buying Gideon meatpacking plant, there's actually some nice lore, as opposed to the first Saw where the contents of the articles were just random stories. Apparently the building had sat abandoned for 100 years before John purchased it as part of his urban renewal group project, which could explain why nobody ever discovered what he was doing there and why the majority of people don't even really know where it was.
Where is it? Where is it? Where is it?
The main game that we follow during Saw 4 is the trial of Daniel Rigg, which contained a lot of parallels to the original Saw. For example, Rigg's game begins when he wakes up in a bathtub, just like Adam Stanheight when he began his Jigsaw journey. There would be another Adam parallel later when Rigg comes upon a room filled with photos of the crimes that took place at a slimy motel, whose red light illumination is very reminiscent of the darkroom in Adam's apartment, which is similarly lined with incriminating candid photos. On a side note, Jigsaw's punishment for Ivan is to strap him down to this bed? I mean, does he not realize that there are people who'll pay good money for that kind of experience? There are a few more callbacks to the original, like the question mark seen throughout Rigg's adventure, which reference the question mark painted on Donnie Recco's stomach for the reverse bear trap. I've mentioned throughout this series that the franchise has many instances of a character playing dead in order to make a surprise attack, and that comes back again in this one, as Detective Matthews feigns death to get close to his supposed captor, Art Blank. Then, at the Chinese New Year celebration, which is of course the Year of the Pig, we see the origin of the pig masks worn by John's followers in all 4 Saw movies. He starts off by using a more cartoony pig mask, but in the background there are more realistic ones, like the ones that he would eventually come to use, and what I found very interesting was another mask with spiral patterns on the cheeks like that of Billy the Puppet. This must just be a coincidence though, because he already had created Billy as a toy for his unborn child prior to these events, unless he had maybe seen this mask elsewhere before and maybe was inspired by it. Another likely coincidental connection found in the Chinese New Year parade scene is these little figurines, which can be seen beside John's deathbed in Saw 3. But back to Rigg, he comes out of his bathroom to find his house has been turned into a trap, and his phone has been taken. I wonder if Jigsaw reused the audio of the voicemail greeting from Saw 2.
You've reached Daniel's phone. He's not in right now.
I should start selling these voicemail greetings on Fiverr or something. He comes up to his first test subject, Brenda, who is trapped in the scalp chair, and he discovers the 3-digit combination to release her.
617
The number's a little nod to the area code in Toronto where the movies 2 through 9 were filmed. It's kind of frustrating that Jigsaw could have been like the ultimate crime-fighting machine, but instead became the ultimate crime-committing machine. I mean, he could have easily just taken these photos to the police. Same thing with the videotape of Ivan. But no, he's got to go and put them in literal torture devices. So Rigg follows the path that Jigsaw had set out for him, while Strom also goes down the trail of Jigsaw's clues, but also stops to interrogate Jill Tuck, at the beginning of which he looks like he's posing for a CZsWorld Instagram photo. She tells him more stories about John's past, including some that took place at her drug clinic, where we see younger versions of some of the criminals from Jigsaw's traps. Gus Colliard, the guy who was taken out by the Magnum eye-hole trap in Saw 2, gets into a fight in the waiting room. Addison Corday, the woman who fell victim to the razor box trap, tries to get John to solicit prostitution from her as he's waiting outside, and Troy, the man who met his demise in the classroom trap in Saw 3, also seems to be a patient, or at least connected to a patient at the Homeward Bound clinic. The third phase of Rigg's trial brings him to a different classroom, where he discovers a husband and wife were impaled with a series of spikes. I think there's a common misconception here, which people love to clown on, that the woman is being tested because she allowed her husband to abuse her. The way that Jigsaw phrases it in the tape does kind of make it seem like this is the case, but I think people forget that this is the same couple from the elementary school flashback, so it was probably more about the woman keeping quiet, knowing that her husband was abusing the students.
He's done this before. She's allowing it.
I'm not saying that makes it any better or that she deserves to be punished or anything, but I'm just trying to explain what might have been going through Jigsaw's head. I can't really explain what was going through Strom's head though during the quick flashes while he's interrogating Jill. Yeah, that's weird. Should we, call someone? Throughout the series, there have been traps that were inspired by ancient torture devices, and you could say that the knife chair that John put Cecil into was one of them. Though it's not exactly the same as this Chinese torture chair from the early 1900s, because Jigsaw's version gave the victim the ability to decide if they wanted to hurt themselves in order to pass. There's also a trap we see in John's workshop which doesn't get used until a future movie. The glass coffin would be back in Saw 5, and a key around Jill's neck during the scenes that take place in 2006 would also return in a future film. The opening trap for Saw 5 is the pendulum, the imitation Jigsaw trap created by Mark Hoffman to execute his sister's killer. Like many Jigsaw traps, Hoffman would take inspiration from a historical torture device and add a modern element using machinery. There's some debate as to whether or not the pendulum was actually used to scare or torture prisoners of the Spanish Inquisition in the 18th century, but we can say with certainty that it was used by Edgar Allan Poe in his fictional story, The Pit and the Pendulum. In fact, almost all of the traps in Saw 5 have ties to uncivilized methods of enforcing justice, and the end of the movie would bring the connection to the Pit and the Pendulum back front and center. Saw 5 would continue the tradition of not bringing in anyone with any experience directing a major studio movie by hiring the production designer of the last 3 movies, David Hackle. As you might expect, this resulted in a lot of Easter eggs hidden in the actual set, maybe more than ever before. After the introduction with the pendulum trap, we're finally shown the aftermath of the Gideon meatpacking plant games of Saws 3 and 4. Agent Strom ends up locked in the operation room and is only able to find his way out with the aid of some glow-in-the-dark paint pointing out a secret door. This is kind of a combination of the glow-in-the-dark paint illuminating the breakable wall in Saw 1 and the cracks at the edge of the trap door revealing an exit in Saw 2. Strom then finds himself in the water cube trap, and he has to use the only thing he has on him, his pen, to perform a tracheectomy. This was really well set up in Saw 4, where Strom was constantly seen fidgeting with the pen. To Hoffman's surprise, he makes it out of the building alive, and on the ambulance is what I believe is the first example where we clearly see the state license plates, and the nickname of the state is the Fairweather State. Throughout this series, I've talked about how I think Saw takes place in a fictional state in the Northeast United States, and the plate does kind of look like New Jersey. Additionally, when we see the inside of the FBI headquarters, the words Eastern Surveillance are written on a window, as if to suggest that Jigsaw City is on the East Coast, and a line from Britt Stevenson later on could be alluding to the fact that she works nearby in New York City.
No, I'm not. I build condos in one of the most densely populated cities in the country.
The FBI has offices in both Newark and New York, and Agent Strom's phone number has a 212 area code, meaning he could be from the nearby city of New York. As Jill Tuck waits to meet with her ex-husband's executor, a woman in the waiting room reads a magazine about John Kramer, with articles written by Elise Lamb and Nate Richmond, both of which are Easter eggs for crew members on Saw 5. Nate Richmond was a production assistant, and Elise Lamb was the art director. As far as characters who never appear on screen, Elise's is one of the biggest, because she not only wrote this magazine article, but also the newspaper article announcing Jigsaw's death, the article about the death of Hoffman's sister, another article about Angelina's murder, and one about the death of her killer, Seth Baxter. But there are a couple unseen Easter egg characters that are even more interesting than Elise. You may remember Sean Schofield, the graphic designer who put his name on the fingerprint analysis report in Saw 4. For Saw 5, he was promoted to first assistant art director, so he got to put his name in there even more. He seems to have helped prepare these probable victim binders, along with Stephanie Woloshin. In the real world, Stephanie is a production assistant, but in the Saw world, she's an FBI agent living a double life as an investigative journalist for the Herald, the same newspaper that Charles Salomon also writes for.
I'm an investigative journalist for the Herald.
I can't imagine the FBI is too happy about one of their agents publishing information about the same cases that they're investigating for a public newspaper. But for our purposes, Stephanie's information answers a big question about the link between John Kramer and Hoffman. How did John find out about Hoffman before the pendulum if the pendulum was Hoffman's first attempt at a trap? It seems that before killing Angelina, Seth Baxter was involved in a drug charge, so he probably had ties to Jill's drug clinic like many of Jigsaw's victims did. So John would have been watching Seth around the time that he took out Hoffman's sister, and when Seth went to prison for it, John switched his focus to Hoffman. The lore you can discover in the newspapers in this series is just so interesting to me for some reason. I guess I feel like I'm getting extra content somehow. For example, Sean Schofield may have also had a second job outside of the FBI, though it's kind of hard to tell on this one. It might say Sean Medfield. We'll have to revisit this if they ever release the movies in 4K, or we could just not do that because no one cares. I like how there's a level of consistency when building the Saw world. When Strom is clicking through the headlines, the publications are many of the same ones we've seen in previous movies. It's also amazing how so many of these Jigsaw articles all use the same picture, which is really just a screenshot from Saw 1. Heck, I even used it in my Things You Missed thumbnail. It's a good picture. Billy should make it his Twitter avatar. He'd fit right in on that website, considering he's a puppet. When Jill watches the tape left behind for her by John, you can tell it was made in the operating room from Saw 3, while John still has his hair, but does not have the bruises given to him by Matthews anymore, which means he probably recorded this shortly before the Gideon Meatpacking Plant games of 2006. This is important because it shows us how late in his life, John began to have remorse about the way his marriage ended. With the discovery of John's body, a ceremony is held at the police station to honor the fallen officers in his case, and promote Hoffman to deputy lieutenant.
But today I'd like to offer a special honor to the detective who's been on this case right from the beginning.
Wait, hold on. If you're honoring Hoffman for being there from the beginning, what about Fisk? According to the FBI's records, Fisk has actually been on the task force longer than Hoffman. I mean, I know Hoffman probably gets some credit for saving that girl, but as far as we know, Fisk has a much cleaner record than Hoffman. He doesn't even get honored at all. He just has to sit there. Hashtag justice for Fisk. Also, we get our first look at Pamela Jenkins, who would play a bigger role, but not until the next movie. Foreshadowing. When Hoffman gives his speech, he talks about cherishing life and bringing justice, which could be what you want to hear from your new lieutenant, but also happens to be Jigsaw's motto, and Hoffman would be the one to carry out Jigsaw's work. Justice would be the key theme in the main game of Saw 5, and each trap was carefully chosen to be symbolic of this idea.
We both deserve to be here.
Strom, or as those close to him call him, Peter, is ordered off the Jigsaw case by his superior, J. Jonah Jameson. Hoffman! And Hoffman begins leaving breadcrumbs to make Agent Erickson, put the pieces together that maybe Peter is Jigsaw. Hoffman goes back to his new lair to check on the next game, and we see how much he's learned from Jigsaw based on the way he decorates the place. The anatomical human drawings call back to the diagrams of the operation room. One of them is a copy of the vascular system diagram from the spike trap in Saw 4. The miniature version of the game was also used by John to plot out the details of the bathroom game. This game would be known as the Fatal Fives trial, and because it was being held this time by Hoffman, a police officer who was obsessed with justice after feeling his sister's killer was not properly punished, each trap resembles an old, outdated criminal execution method. And yes, to be entirely clear, this game was mapped out by John, but Hoffman was still the one to put everything into motion. So I think the symbolism is still valid. The first room is an update on a device tracing back to France during the times of the French Revolution. The guillotine was used to behead its victims, but this version implemented a system of tension wires to force the participants to all work together in order for them to survive. Instead of the typical shape for a guillotine, these blades all have a V shape, which may be on purpose to stay on theme with the Roman numeral representing the 5th movie. There are also 5 participants in this game, and I don't think that's an accident. The second room requires victims to find keys that give them access to these safety chambers. The name of the game is Inclusion. There aren't enough chambers to protect everybody, so in order for everyone to survive, someone would have had to invite another into their chamber. The Salem witch trials were a series of hearings that outcast supposed witches from society in the 1600s. And like the unlucky loser who was outcast in this room, they would meet a fiery fate. I guess this is Saw 5's Pig Vat in the sense that it's pretty metal.
badass, actually.
Man on.
The third room contained the electric bathtub, which represented another American execution method, the electric chair, which was created in the 1880s in Buffalo, New York, not too far away from where I think Saw takes place. Again, this one was designed for each of the 5 of them to work together by dividing up the voltage, rather than having one person take on the full shock. The last room represents human sacrifice, which I don't think we can trace back to one specific era or culture, but again is designed for them to work together by each sacrificing a smaller amount of blood. Of course, that doesn't happen because there are only 2 of them left at this point, so here's what I would have done. They had to fill this beaker up with blood to a certain point in order to win the game. There is a grate blocking the way, so you can't just drop stuff directly in the beaker. It has to be liquid. The door to the bathtub room was still open after they cleared it, so I would take off my shirt, dip it in the tub until it's soaking wet, and then ball it up and squeeze out the water above the beaker. They probably could have filled it up most of the way like that. It's not until the end that they realize what Jigsaw was trying to tell them from the beginning, that they need to work together.
Today, this singular way of thinking will be put to the test. Today, 5 will become 1 with a common goal of survival.
But while Hoffman executes the Fatal Five's game, Strom follows the trail of Hoffman. In one scene at the FBI headquarters, we actually see somebody studying audio waveforms, something that would come back in the next movie. There's also a name randomly written on an FBI bulletin board, Tom Van Sellides. He's the assistant production manager on Saw 5. The police station also has another crew reference Easter egg. A box in the background here contains the name Soren Popescu, who is the first assistant art director. As Strom gets closer and closer to discovering the truth about Hoffman, we learn more and more about Hoffman's past and how he came to be involved with the Jigsaw. It starts after he conducted the pendulum trap one day at his apartment complex, when he bumps into this stereotypical girl who probably watches my videos and follows his journey through the building. He hears what he thinks is a dispute and approaches with his gun out. It turns out to be only this lady with her dog, but I think this scene does a good job of illustrating what kind of cop Hoffman is. This trait would be explored again in Saw 7. Yeah, I prefer to call it Saw 7, because it's very difficult to watch it in 3D anymore, and also it's not the final chapter anymore, so I don't call it that either. Finally, he gets to the elevator, where he's got to get out of the way of this lady and these dudes who are probably on their way to go meet up with Found Flicks at the Papa Roach concert, so it ends up just being Hoffman and John in the elevator. And since this scene takes place shortly before the events of Saw 1, John is seen wearing the leather gloves that were a big part of the first movie, but weren't really used in the Bousman films. Some say these gloves are an homage to Italian horror director Dario Argento, who has a movie called Deep Red, where the bad guy has these leather gloves. I mean, I guess it could be an intentional reference, but it could just as easily be not that.
Hoffman!
He wakes up in John's workshop in this spectacularly uncreative trap, but one thing I did notice was an early version of the death collar from Saw 3. In that movie, Amanda claims that she built the collar, so maybe she physically built it off of one of John's prototype designs. When John details the rules of the game to Hoffman, he does so through the reflection of a mirror.
I am the man you call Jigsaw.
Could he be doing this because he's looking into the past, looking back at the rear view of the old Hoffman who has not yet been reborn as a disciple of Jigsaw? Is that too deep for a Saw movie? Maybe. Maybe not. Also in this workshop, I spotted one of those Chinese figurines from beside John's deathbed in Saw 3 and the New Year's Festival in Saw 4. Strom would continue to go through old files to dig out more and more about Mark Hoffman's past, where he would page past a curious detail that could have changed the context of crimes that took place all the way back in the first Saw film. As Strom goes through the old case files from the razor wire traps victim Paul Leahy, you may notice that Detective Hoffman was actually the lead investigator on it. When we see that crime scene back in the first movie, it's Singh, Tapp, and Carey, who has not yet been promoted to detective. There's no sign of Hoffman at all. I don't know if that means he had already investigated it and these other guys were coming to take a second look, or if he was calling the shots and asked Singh and Tapp to make their own assessment, perhaps to lead them down the path to Jigsaw with a plan to take them out. The files seen earlier on list Hoffman, Tapp, and Singh as investigators on the case, and it seems to be the first Jigsaw case any of them worked on from what we can see there. Though I should add that there are other Jigsaw murders that aren't listed here or shown in any movie, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. We'll probably never solve the mystery of Hoffman's involvement in the Paul Leahy case. Saw 5 also has another ambiguous question, which comes up when Jill Tuck meets with Erickson at the FBI headquarters, claiming that she believes the Bureau is following her.
I think it's the agent who interrogated me. Agent Strom.
The strange thing is, we never see this happen. In fact, we see Strom laser focused on investigating Hoffman, paying no attention to Jill. I guess it is possible that she was told to do this by John as part of his instructions for her after his death, but I've come to think that there is another possibility. In Saw 6, we see that she has made contact with Hoffman, who is actively trying to get rid of Strom and make him look like the unknown accomplice. I think there's a possibility that Hoffman instructed Jill to bring up these concerns with Erickson. Maybe he even threatened her to get what he wants. I don't see any other reason for her to go to him, unless she's just trying to get a job at the Daily Bugle.
You serious?
Maybe it was all part of Hoffman's plan to frame Special Agent Strom. He does so by leaving Strom's phone in his lair at the catacombs where the Fiendish Five's game took place. Okay, not the Fiendish Five, the Fatal Five. That's what they're called.
You know, that Thingus Rackamagookus had a lot of nice pictures, but way too many big words.
So he led J. Jonah Jameson to believe that Strom was guilty, while leading Strom to a seemingly inconspicuous house. A house that is the last house on the left side of its streets, with a light on the left and a storage area on the right. A house with a small door underneath the stairs. A house whose walls have a very familiar layout. Could this location be the infamous nerve gas house, which was the venue of the main game seen in Saw 2? It's definitely very similar in layout, right down to the room that contained the safe with a trap door in the same spot leading down to the underground tunnel network, which appears to be the very same tunnel network that contains the bathroom, judging by the inclusion of this sliding door. We know that John was a civil engineer, once involved in a major housing project, and he does have access to multiple properties. In Saw 2, we see him utilize both the nerve gas house and the fake-out house with a seemingly similar layout. We also know that the project was supposed to provide housing to 40 low-income families, so it seems reasonable that each of these units was based on the same design, and they may have each had the same layout. I have to admit, it doesn't really make sense for John or Hoffman to pull off a major renovation of the dilapidated nerve gas house just for this one small moment. I mean, I'm not really even sure that they could fix up the house in such a short time frame, especially given all that they accomplished between October 2005 and April 2006, and Saw 5 takes place not too long after, most likely in July 2006. Maybe these houses were all placed on a grid so that there were several houses on the left side of their respective streets. That would put the Hoffman house in the same neighborhood as the nerve gas house and the fake-out house, which would make it plausible that it could be connected to the same tunnel network that contains both the bathroom and the glass coffin room. And we know that it's the same tunnel network because Strom finds a big red streak, which we learn the origin of in Saw 7 when we see the quote-unquote extended version of Gordon's escape from the bathroom after Saw 1. Like I mentioned earlier, this might just be one of those Saw mysteries that can never be fully explained, forever being discussed in the comments. Although I think there is more of a chance that this location could be revisited in a future movie, so maybe one day we'll find out. The safe room is also full of Easter eggs, and I'm not even talking about that clown that is basically identical to the one clown in Beverly's house in the 2017 version of it. The room contains more of those Chinese figures, the pig ornament from Jeff Demlin's study, and several wood mannequins, a connection to the many mannequins that John used to test his traps on, dating back to the old Stygian Street hideout in an old mannequin factory. So Hoffman's plan, at least for now, works. J. Jonah Erickson finds Strom's phone in the catacombs at the site of the game, and Strom falls victim to the collapsing walls of the glass coffin trap. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned the pendulum, which was also the titular device of Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Pit in the Pendulum. To bring that connection full circle, Saw 5's final trap represents the pit, as written by Poe himself. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. While this would be the end of Strom, his legacy would live on in the sequel. For Saw 6, a new director was brought onto the series, and just like all of his predecessors, Kevin Greutert was a first-time director, though he did have experience with the franchise, having edited movies 1 through 5. On his title card, there's some flashing effect going on with the letters VI, highlighting the Roman numerals for this 6th installment. There would be a lot of 6s that come up in this film, like the fact that John's instructions for his ex-wife come in 6 envelopes, the inclusion of 6 new traps, the dog pit, which was a group of 6 insurance policy inspectors, who were all tested in the carousel trap. And according to IMDb, the soundtrack, Zep 6, has a length of 6 minutes and is played in the background of the final 6-minute climax scene before the credits roll. Hard to say if that last one is really intentional, but even with all of the 6s found in this movie, there's an even more important 7. And I'm not talking about Mr. Feldman's line when he gives the box to Jill.
Miss Tuck, what's in the box?
What's in the box?
I'm talking about a new 7 that hints to the audience that the next sequel will be the last of this saga. I think Saw 6 is probably the most underrated movie in the franchise. We get to see Jigsaw explore some new territory as the film makes a statement about the health insurance system in the United States. It was a topic of discussion in 2009 when Saw 6 came out, just 5 months before the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was passed. Many of the traps in Saw 6 are symbolic of the position that healthcare providers have to take when considering coverage for a client. Our opening trap features a couple of malicious moneylenders who planned to repossess more than their payees could ever pay back. And honestly, this one never made sense to me because it's completely unfair. The rules state that whoever offers the most flesh onto the scale will be the one to survive. And the woman, Simone, has considerably less flesh to give. She's at a disadvantage because she's healthy. As per Jigsaw's motto, she cherished her life more, and yet she's being punished for it? Still, if I was in the trap, I would have put all my clothes on the scale first. It's not like this movie isn't already rated R. We are then introduced to the Umbrella Health Company. I think this is less of a Resident Evil homage and more of a reference to the purpose of an umbrella to cover you, just as an insurance company offers coverage. But this company is very particular about who they're willing to cover, and has a team of policy inspectors checking up on people to make sure that they're at a low risk to actually get sick. They sit around a circular table in the middle of the office, whose shape resembles the carousel trap that they would eventually be placed on. This team is referred to as the Dog Pit, and the top dog is Dave, who has an award on his desk that says Terminator of the Month. This is obviously a reference to the termination of insurance plans, but looking back on it with more context gives it a darker meaning, where it seems to be about the termination of human life.
Terminator strikes again.
The boss, William Easton, works with his lawyer on a deposition about a man named Harold Abbott, the father of a family who would eventually give the final judgment of William.
You remember dealing with a Mr. Harold Abbott?
In his office, Mr. Easton has the news broadcasting on the television, where the anchor talks about the distribution of John Kramer's assets after his death, and she mentions that most of them were in real estate, which may lend more credibility to the nerve gas house theory that I mentioned in the last episode of Things You Missed. Also, the news station is WNKW News. If you lived in North America around the heyday of broadcast television, you may be familiar with the 4-character station IDs given to every television and radio station. All stations east of the Mississippi River were required to start with W. I've given plenty of evidence that the setting of the Saw movies is on the East Coast throughout this series, so this is just one more factor in favor of that idea. Another interesting aspect of this office is the fish tank full of piranha, which as far as I know are not a common pet, and are known for their predatory behavior. I think they're symbolic of this company.
Piranha.
Good job, John. You really know your fishies. After William's capture, he finds himself in the Mr. Creepypasta trap. His opponent is the janitor, Hank, a smoker who likely would not have been able to acquire health insurance according to Umbrella's policy.
While only 52 years of age, this man has continued to smoke even though he has a history of high blood pressure and heart disease.
We eventually come to find out that John chose Mr. Easton for his game because he once denied coverage for an experimental cancer treatment. Hank is the same age that John was when he died, and I feel like he was chosen to make a statement about the insurance company's power to, in a way, choose who lives and who dies. Also, this is the first time John shows himself on screen during the tapes where he explains the rules to his victims, and I think he did this to remind William of the face he once encountered when the two met at a party at Homeward Bound Clinic. It didn't matter that John was giving away his identity in this one because the instructions for this game were delivered to Jill in his will. In other words, the trial of William Easton could only take place after John's death, which I think is fitting because it makes William realize the message that Jigsaw is trying to convey, that because of his policy, the blood is figuratively on his hands. The trap asks its victims to use as little oxygen as possible. Whoever does that can avoid being crushed by this machine. They've both got the wrong idea here. In my experience with scuba diving, the best way to conserve air is to take slow, deep, continuous breaths. William's faith in his policy would be challenged again in the next trap, but first, there would be some interesting details of note in the past of Jill Tuck. After receiving the materials from John's will, Jill flashes back to some of the memorable moments of her marriage and its downfall. We see the grave of their unborn son, Gideon, which features an infinity icon, perhaps to symbolize John's belief in the idea of rebirth. He considers his test subjects to be reborn whenever they pass one of his traps. It's not entirely clear if the animals are connected to this in a circle of life kind of way, or if they could be connected to the location of his largest game, which takes place at an abandoned zoo. As far as horror movies that take place in zoos go, Pretty good track record. William Easton continues through his trial, where he's reminded of the party where he first met John Kramer. It would appear that Amanda, a former patient of the clinic, is also present at this party, wearing the same outfit she had on during the reverse bear trap scene in Saw 1, minus those detached sleeves. I guess Amanda doesn't have that many outfits because in an earlier flashback, she has the same shirt she had on when she helped John set up the bathroom game in Saw 3. But you can tell by her hair that these things aren't taking place on the same day. The next section of the zoo game took place in what looks like a reptile habitat. And I have to wonder if Kevin Grutert saw that one jump scare the year before in The Dark Knight. Yeah, that one. And basically thought, you know what? We're gonna do that too. Just doesn't hit quite the same though. But I do like this trap because it forces William to make similar kind of life or death decisions to those made in his work, but it personalizes them by using his own employees. Does he kill a family woman nearing the end of her life or a healthy young man with no family? His insurance formula would have him cover the man rather than the woman, but in the heat of the moment, that's not what he decides.
As you can see, the choice is not so clear when you are face to face with the people whose blood will stain your hands.
We revisit the moment William's policy personally affected John, who had been seeking health coverage to undergo an experimental gene therapy for his cancer from a Norwegian doctor. He brings in a pamphlet where we can see the name of the doctor is Soren Popescu. That happens to be the same name of the first assistant art director, whose name was also seen on the box in the FBI headquarters in Saw 5. Since I always like to make up stories so that these Easter eggs make sense in universe, I'm gonna say that Dr. Popescu was on vacation visiting the US where he happened to be the victim of a crime. When John's coverage is denied, he goes on a rant about the empty promises of politicians who claim that health-related decisions should be made by doctors and patients. He motions to the clip playing on the TV screen, which is a quick shot of John McCain, who was a senator who ran for president in 2008. Now, I'm not gonna pretend like I know anything about politics, but from what I can gather, this guy opposed Obama's healthcare plan, which came out in 2009, the same year that Saw 6 was released. Obviously, the movie takes place in 2006 though, not long after Jigsaw's death, but I imagine that McCain already had his views about healthcare beforehand, so the meaning behind the clip is still relevant. Room number 3 is the steam maze, where William had to guide his lawyer through a dangerous labyrinth filled with vapors hot enough to leave a nasty burn. Come on man, just climb over the railing a little bit and pull the lever from an angle where you don't have to get burned. You ever played Crash Bandicoot? These steam things can totally be avoided. He also gets kicked in the balls and is fine 2 seconds later, but whatever. Let's go back to the FBI storyline. They figured out that there's an abnormality in Strom's fingerprints, which they found at the crime scene of the opening trap. Special Agent Perez shows Hoffman the screen with the analysis report, where we see Strom's name above a few others. Anthony Ianni is a new name for us. He's the production designer on this movie. There are 2 other names that are not new. They're both first assistant art directors, but in the world of the movie, Sean Schofield is an FBI agent and possibly newspaper writer, and Soren, well, we just discussed Soren, the Norwegian doctor turned tourist crime victim. Someone's gotta make a Saw movie, or at least a comic or something with all these Easter egg characters as the main characters, just for my sake. As the game nears its end, Jill prepares her plan for its conclusion. And in her apartment, there are some photos of her and John, which seem to tell us the reason that she's still willing to help him. If she keeps those pictures up after their divorce, it would seem that there are still some feelings there. Also, how old were they when they got married? I mean, the pictures are out of focus in the background there, but I mean, look at that hairline. This marriage seems like it might have been kind of recent. The biggest room of the zoo game features a large spiral on both the door and on the carousel itself. The spiral has been a symbol associated with both Jigsaw and Billy the Puppet from the very beginning. To match Mr. Easton's ratio, where he rejects 2/3 of insurance applicants, Jigsaw asks him to kill off 2/3 of his application review team. The trap resembles a carnival ride. He uses Billy for the tape this time, rather than footage of himself. And with his white face paint and cheeky bow tie, Billy kind of does resemble a carny. Of all the Billy videotapes, this one might be the creepiest. Not sure what it is. The carnival music that comes in when the ride starts moving provides great contrast with the sheer horror of the scene. It brings out the worst in each employee because of their desperation to live. In the end, Mr. Easton goes full iDubbbz and simps his staff down to 2 women. Meanwhile, the FBI has finished descrambling the tape from the pendulum trap scene in the last movie, and they invite Hoffman to see the results. Detective Hoffman has no choice but to go with Erickson and Perez to see the results of the voice descramble. Now, as an audio professional, I don't think that's a thing you can do. The Jigsaw voice is made by layering together audio with various pitches, so the FBI could analyze different frequencies, but they'd have no way of knowing which one was the original voice. Now, normally I don't talk about mistakes and just accept the fact that it's a movie, but I mean, come on, this movie is directed by an editor. He should have caught that. But despite all of that, I think this is probably actually my favorite scene in the Saw franchise, and at the end of it, Hoffman Hoffman is going to his car after taking out 3 agents. And we see this prop, which looks like one of those chattering teeth gags. I don't know why this would be here inside of this computer lab if not to foreshadow the upcoming scene. This is essentially someone's jaw, and I think it's a sign that Hoffman's jaw is about to get damaged in the reverse bear trap 2.0. But before heading back to the zoo for the last part of William's trial, Hoffman goes back into the lab, where Special Agent Erickson is still alive and covers him in gasoline. Brutal! Just brutal!
Brutality!
When William makes it to the final room, he sees his sister, Pamela, the Jigsaw reporter condemned for her sensationalist writing. But his life ends up in the hands of the family of Frank Abbott, the man who died as a result of Umbrella Health terminating his insurance plan on a technicality.
1, 2...
So far, this is the only Saw movie to have a post-credit scene where we see Amanda, circa Saw 3, delivering a message to Corbett Denlin.
Don't trust the one who saves you.
I've seen this scene criticized in the past because we never specifically see what comes of it. In Saw 5, Corbett was rescued by Hoffman and taken to safety, and we never see her again after that. At least, not that we know of. So what was the meaning of this scene? I think the implication here is that after saving Corbett, she told Agent Perez that some woman warned her not to trust the one that saves her. So Perez was immediately suspicious of Hoffman. This is reflected in this line after Perez is badly injured by the exploding Billy the Puppet.
She said your name, you know. Last thing she said was Detective Hoffman. Why'd she say that? Why'd she say your name?
Then in Saw 6, Perez is revealed to have survived the attack, but even after supposedly determining that Strom was the second accomplice, Perez still doesn't look too happy to see Hoffman. I think it all goes back to Corbett's warning. I really don't see how else they would have had the idea to look back at what kind of knife was used to cut Seth Baxter's jigsaw piece, what kind of oil was left behind by Strom's fingerprints, or really any reason to doubt that one of the tapes was recorded by someone other than John. The original Saw saga was released in consecutive years from 2004 to 2010, ending with Saw 7. Technically Saw 3D, but I call it Saw 7. That was originally going to be the last movie, so it was given an alternate name, Saw: The Final Chapter. Now in Saw 6, at the Umbrella Health Company, William Easton's desk is where all contract disputes come to an end. He even tells John when he comes in to plead his case about getting coverage for the gene therapy.
Well, the buck stops here, John. Fire away.
So basically we're being told that whatever it is, it stops at Mr. Easton's desk. And on Mr. Easton's desk at all times is these dice, which add up to the number 7. Okay, big deal, there's some dice, they happen to add up to 7, there's 7 movies, it's probably a coincidence, right? Well, I was gonna say the same thing, but then I realized that no matter what angle, no matter what scene in the movie, the numbers facing the camera always add up to 7. Which means someone had to specifically go in and move these dice every time the camera moves in order to keep this consistent. The buck stops here, and the series stops at 7. At the time it was made, Saw 7 was to be the final chapter of the Saw franchise, and in honor of the series, it would bring back old characters, old locations, old music, old tricks, and old traps. But I just want to know what happened to the old hot dog guy from Saw 2. We're gonna get into all of the Saw series callbacks that are in this movie, and there are a lot of them, but first, let's talk about something new. For the first time, the opening trap takes place out in public during the day, rather than in a dark, abandoned cellar of some kind. The characters find themselves in a display window for a store called Welthammer. Judging by the style, this is 1000% where Foundflix shops, and in one wide shot, we see their slogan, renovating your life, which I think fits nicely with the goal of Jigsaw, to rehabilitate the lives of his test subjects. He was way ahead of his time, teaching young men the dangers of getting simped.
The same woman has played each of you for a fool, manipulating your love for her and causing nothing but pain. She is toxic.
Now I saw James's kill count, and upon mention of the word toxic, he put a Britney Spears soundbite, so I'm gonna one-up him. And honestly, this is probably the happiest ending of any Saw trap, and Hoffman retires to his new hideout, which contains a variety of secrets. I tend to refer to the original 7 Saw movies as the Saw saga, so here we are at the end of it. The Saw movies were longtime kings of the October box office. There was even a marketing phrase that went,
"If it's Halloween, it must be Saw."
But Saw 6 was actually beaten in 2009 by Paranormal Activity, and Saw 6's director, Kevin Grutter, was supposed to direct Paranormal Activity 2, which would go head-to-head with Saw 7. So the studio said, you know what? You're contractually obligated to do another movie for us. You can't do Paranormal 2. So Kevin Grutter said, fine, but I'm gonna change a bunch of stuff last minute, and it's gonna suck. Fine. but we're shooting it in 3D. Hoffman's hideout is filled with the stuff we've come to expect to find in a Jigsaw workshop. Billies, piggies, and mannequins. This mannequin could be wearing the prototype of the harness that Dina wears in the opening trap. I've pointed out clues about the location of the Saw saga throughout this series, and most evidence has pointed to the setting being a fictional version of Newark, New Jersey, while others seem to point towards New York City. The newscast mentions a storm hitting the East Coast, but Hoffman's driver's license looks to be more inspired by a New York ID, unlike the license plates, which seem to be more New Jersey. One thing's for sure, that's gonna be a disgusting omelet. Also, the money that he's putting in his bag at the end of the movie says Bank of New York on it, so take that as you will. The TV mentions 7 survivors found from the zoo game of the last movie, but by my count, we've only got 6. Pamela Jenkins, Brent Abbott, Tara Abbott, Addie, Emily, and Shelby. Unless they're counting Jill Tuck, but she wasn't actually part of the game, so I don't really get that. Another point that I mentioned about the location in the last video was that the TV station starts with the letter W, which signifies a channel in the eastern United States, whereas K means western states. The TV station where Bobby Dagan has his talk show appearance is KWGA-TV, so I think he filmed the interview in another city shortly before traveling back across the country for the survivor support group. The host actually does mention that he's on a national tour.
Welcome back. We're live with Bobby Dagan, whose national tour Survive, My Story of Overcoming Jigsaw rolls into town this weekend.
She's also got a Buddha statue on her set, just like the one seen by John's deathbed in Saw 3. But what's more interesting about this talk show is the title of it, Daybreak with Donna Evans. The previous year, there were a number of horror movies distributed by Lionsgate, one of which was called Daybreakers, which was a pretty good vampire movie with just one part that just... I'm gonna roll the clip. Another thing that's very interesting about this, and completely unplanned, is that Daybreakers was directed by Peter and Michael Spirit, who would eventually be the ones to bring the Saw series back from the dead, pun intended, in 2017 with Jigsaw. This is the point where Saw 7 does another thing that the series has never really done before and shows us a dream sequence, which I'm not crazy about because the series has been kind of grounded in reality for the first 6 entries, so why are we doing this now? We see the signature Jigsaw spiral on this device, and although this is just a nightmare, maybe Jill had this bad dream based off of a real trap idea that she found in his workshop. I'm also glad they brought back the metal for this scene. We haven't had a good metal Saw trap in a while. Also, I can't show it for multiple obvious reasons, but after she's torn in half by the pain train, you can just see her boobs for half a second, just hanging there on opposite sides. Didn't notice that the first couple times I watched it, but feel free to pop in the Blu-ray if that's your thing, I guess. Last episode I pointed out how she still had pictures of John in her apartment, which could be used to explain why she was willing to carry out his plan, because it looks like there are still some feelings there. She's got a shot of him by her bedside too, and she still sleeps on one side of the bed. This movie's all about her trying to stay safe from Hoffman, but I don't think wine and pills are the best way to go when you're trying to stay alive. After this, there's a time skip forward to the next Jigsaw trap, and the main victim is this guy named Evan. If he looks familiar, it's because he's played by Linkin Park frontman Chester Bennington. Apparently one of the guys in his band lived next door to Saw producer Mark Berg, and the rest is history. Evan and his friends would not make it out of this trap though, and so would not get to participate in the Jigsaw Survivor support group, which contains a whole bunch of cameos from characters who survived in movies past, and many of them look different than they did during their initial tests. The Jigsaw Survivor Support Group brings together those who managed to escape their tests dating all the way back from the first Saw to Saw 7. They include Lawrence Gordon, the doctor from the bathroom game in Saw, Scott Malick, the arsonist of the Fatal 5 in Saw 5, Simone, the lone shark from the Pound of Flesh trap in Saw 6, Addie, the receptionist of Umbrella Health in Saw 6, Emily, one of the policy reviewers from Umbrella Health in Saw 6, Tara Abbott, the widowed mother in Saw 6, Brad and Ryan from the opening of Saw 7, Bobby Dagan, who was only pretending to be a victim to sell books, and a new character named Sydney. There are a couple of other new characters as well, though we never learned their names or stories. There are other known survivors who are missing from this group. From Saw 1, we have Jeff Ridenauer, Allison Gordon, and Diana Gordon. From Saw 2, there's Daniel Matthews. From Saw 3, there's Corbett Denlin. From Saw 4, there's the teacher's wife, Morgan. From Saw 5, we have Britt Stevenson. From Saw 6, there's Brent Abbott, Pamela Jenkins, and Shelby. From Saw 7, there's Joan, the woman who inspired Bobby Dagan. And from Jigsaw, there's Logan Nelson. We get to see the story of the new character, Sydney. The reason she's tested is not clear, but the theme of the trap seems to be I don't know, gardening themed. We've got lawnmowers, potted plants, some Keemstar merch. You really gonna start killing people for not mowing the dang old lawn, Jigsaw? She gets into it a little bit with the one-handed wonder, Simone. We saw her in the last movie explode at Hoffman for asking if she learned anything from Jigsaw's test, and this time she blows up on Sydney for suggesting that the trap was the best thing that ever happened to her.
That's a bunch of bullshit. He had to die for you to leave him? You wanna know the best thing that happened to me? After having to cut off my own arm? Is handicapped parking at the damn mall!
Good job, Simone. Girl always stands her ground. The location where the group meets is inside of a church. I've talked in the previous videos about the religious undertones of Jigsaw's following. The survivors of his tests become his followers, and his rules serve as commandments to them. So them meeting inside of a church is an interesting decision in that respect. And I know I've said it before, but Gordon's part is so hilarious. I can't not play it.
I'm sure I speak for everyone here when I say how grateful we are to be part of your promotional DVD.
So the Metropolitan Police Department couldn't get it done, the FBI couldn't get it done, so now with the new Jigsaw being Hoffman, a police officer, it falls on Internal Affairs, the division that investigates crimes committed by the police. Which raises the question, who investigates the IA? Because I have a crime to report. Gibson, you made this way too obvious. Did you have to make it that obvious? The main game of Saw 7 follows Bobby Dagan as he tries to save those close to him as punishment for faking that he was a Jigsaw victim. His wife watches his struggle on the monitor.
What's going on? What's going on?
Like, do you really not know? Your husband wrote a whole book about this. Do you seriously not know what's going on here? We see the moment Bobby had the idea to write his book after seeing the story of a survivor of one of the traps.
It gave me light. That pure moment of absolute horror gave me light, and as wrong as this may seem, I'm better for enduring it.
It's interesting the way she words it, that it gave her light, because John talks about the idea of enlightenment for his test subjects from the very first movie, and lights were used as a symbol of this at the beginning of each film. As Bobby continues down the IKEA path, he discovers his own motivational phrases being mockingly displayed against him. We know this because the title of his book is an acronym, Survive. We can't really see the text on the book cover, but if we take the first letter of the phrases graffitied on the psychiatric hospital in the order that they appear, it spells out the word survive. Put it all together and you get start your life anew, understand your problems, redefine your priorities, verify your self-worth through commitment, ignore your detractors, value your loved ones, embrace every day as if it is your last. There's also a theme that connects each room throughout the game. Bobby's associates enable his behavior by knowingly supporting his lie. Throughout the series, there have been many examples I've pointed out of John pulling ideas from Asian culture, and the traps in this game connect to a Japanese legend known as Three Wise Monkeys, a 17th century pictorial maxim meant to teach its audience not to ignore when they see someone commit a sin. The three monkeys are Mizaru, translating to see not, Hikazaru, which means hear not, and Iwazaru, speak not. In the tape for each of the games in Bobby's trial, Jigsaw mentions that his associates must speak no evil, hear no evil, or see no evil in order to pass. The first room contains a trap for his publicist, Nina.
She has been your publicist for years, knowing your lies, but choosing to speak no evil. She has been richly rewarded for her words, but today she will be rewarded for her silence.
And the trap literally threatens her ability to speak and helps spread Bobby's lies by threatening to impale her throat if she makes too much noise before he retrieves the key. This is one of the most frustrating traps ever, because she hears the tape too, she knows she's not supposed to scream, and yet... I mean, is she that dumb? Does she have a death wish? Why does she keep screaming?
Why would you just shut the f*** up?
Thank you. Nina was the dumbest victim ever. The next room contains a trap for Bobby's lawyer, Suzanne.
Before you is your lawyer, who swore an oath of ethics but chose to see no evil in order to benefit herself.
If Bobby could not save her, she would be forced to see no evil, because she'd be impaled in the face with more spikes, probably making her look like a Minecraft creeper. And like the last game, why is she screaming through the entire thing? I mean, the dude's obviously trying to help you, just shut up for a minute and let him focus. I'm having a hard time feeling bad for anyone who died in this movie so far. The third room by default is the Hear No Evil room, and contains Bobby's best friend, Kale.
Across from you is your closest friend. He knows all your sins, yet he acts as though he hears no evil. Today, what he hears will be the difference between life and death.
So Bobby has to guide him across the room using only audible commands. I mean, I would have just told him to stay put and gotten on all fours and taken the key to him, which would have been way faster and safer, but I'm starting to think Bobby's not the smartest. But as this game is going on, the search for Hoffman continues, and while this email sent to Gibson's office only appears on screen momentarily, there is a lot of info we can pull from it. Hoffman sends a DVD, not a promotional DVD mind you, to Gibson's supposedly secret safe house. The disc is named Scene 57 VHS Edit 4x3. I wish I could say this was a callback to the first movie where we saw the label that says Saw bathroom set, and by doing this they're bringing the series somehow full circle, but this is kind of inexcusable 7 films in 7 years type of stuff. With the location of the safe house compromised, Gibson decides to move Jill to a holding cell in the police station for safety. He comes in to ask her a question, interrupting her reading this blank book.
Do you know this guy?
Hoffman sends another video, this time over email, and if we pause on the screen, there are a few things to note. The most recent email is obviously from Detective Hoffman, but the one before that is from Soren Popescu. Those of you who have been following all of my Things You Missed in Saw episodes will remember that Soren is the first assistant art director of these movies, but his name has appeared as an Easter egg in Saw 5 and Saw 6, so I've been piecing together a backstory for him. Based on the previous appearances of his name, we determined he was a doctor from Norway who was a victim of a crime while visiting the US. Seeing as how he's now sending files to Matt Gibson of Internal Affairs, I would have to say that the crime committed against him must have been committed by the police. Maybe he was subject to some Eric Matthews police brutality! The other guy emailing Gibson is Brent McGillivray. This is the first time we've seen that name, and he's credited as first assistant art director and set designer. In the other column here, we can see Hoffman's email address. Now I know there's a lot of debate in the Saw fandom on whether or not Hoffman is alive, so why don't we just send him an email and ask him? To mhoffman@metro.pol. Mark, just wanted to email you to confirm whether or not you are, in fact, still alive. Please email me back if you are not dead. Thanks. I'll let you guys know if he gets back to me. Below Hoffman's email address, we have the date, March 12th. Saw 5 and 6 took place in July 2006, and we can assume Jill's dream took place in the winter on account of all the snow, so the March 12th date puts us in early 2007, which checks out nicely with the 2007 calendar that we saw at the auto body shop. Under that, we see Gibson's email address. Might as well send him something too. mgibson@metro.pol. Hey Gibson, I know you're now dead, but I just wanted to say you were the only good cop besides Carrie, and she's also dead. Rest in peace, man. Rest in peace. The email content reminds Gibson of an event from their past where Hoffman saved his life by mercilessly shooting a junkie.
I had no choice but to report Hoffman for brutality!
They end up finding the secret room in the auto body shop behind the bathroom mirror. This might be a reference to Candyman, where the two apartments are connected by mirror in a similar fashion, but could also just be a callback to Saw 5 and the hidden doorway scene in that movie. They end up finding Hoffman and John's notes about the victims for this game, and they give us a little bit more insight into how John's assistants are always able to find and kidnap the victims so easily. There are detailed notes about their daily routines, their personal information, where they can be found, even specifics about their alarm codes and computer passwords. Bobby's final test is to do what he lied about having done in his book by impaling his pecs with meat hooks and hoisting himself up. This has got to be the dumbest trap yet. I mean, just put your feet on the smooth part of these hooks and then pull yourself up that way. Or just climb the chain or something. This is literally the dumbest way to go about this. Naturally, he fails, and as a result, his wife has to pay the price for some reason. It doesn't really say why she was a part of this, but I think we can assume it has something to do with the fact that she was only interested in him for his fame. Her punishment is a modern-day version of the Brazen Bull, a torture device / execution chamber depicted in renderings from ancient Greece, in which a person was placed inside of a hollowed bronze bowl and a fire was ignited underneath, thereby roasting the person. Not in the way I might roast my opponents in Rocket League, but actually roasting them, like the way you might roast your shawarma before sticking it in a pita and drizzling over tahini sauce to stay on the Mediterranean theme of this trap. The Saw version of the Brazen Bull seems to be more shaped like a brazen pig, keeping up with the theme of pigs that has come up time and time again in this franchise. Like the pendulum trap from the 5th movie, there is some debate as to whether or not the Brazen Bull actually ended up becoming a real thing. And that's the last we see of Bobby Dagan. I mean, I guess he's most likely still alive. I'd personally like to see him write another book. The police realize that Hoffman tapped into their security system.
He's been watching us the whole time.
I think it's not so much that he's a hacker, but more that he's a cop, and I guess they forgot to revoke his access after realizing that he's bad. Or maybe he's actually a hacker. I mean, who even knows at this point? Hoffman had hidden himself in one of the body bags being transported back to the station, and the first person he encounters is the coroner. This is meaningful for Hoffman because this was the same guy that discovered that a different knife was used used to cut the jigsaw piece from Seth Baxter, which is what led to Hoffman being caught by the FBI in the previous movie, forcing him to hide out for 8 months. He then goes on a rampage, taking out nearly the entire police station in pursuit of Jill Tuck.
I've been looking for you.
If we pause as Jill grabs something to defend herself with, it looks to be part of a nail file kit. There's also an article about lowering the cost of healthcare by moving to Canada, though I guess that one would be more appropriate in Saw 6. She's able to get away, if only temporarily, and scrambles to hide in the evidence room. And in the background of nearly every shot in there, we can spot old traps, newspaper headlines, design sketches, and more things you missed. After following the journeys of countless law enforcement officers in their conquest to put an end to the Jigsaw killings, it is only fitting that we near the conclusion of the Saw saga by finally paying a visit to the main evidence room. But fans may choose to see it as more of a shrine to almost everything we have come to know over the course of this 7-movie journey. As Hoffman comes in and turns on the lights, there's a collection of newspaper clippings and magazine covers, including this one, Police Injured During Jigsaw Raid, which details the beginning of the invasion at Wilson Steel Plant from the beginning of Saw 2. On the top shelf of this thing, you'll see the head cage that we saw in John's workshop in Saw 2, but was never used. From that same workshop is this photo on the back wall, which corresponds to the face mask trap that I theorized to be possibly an early version of the oxygen crusher. And this giant clamp was the device that crushed the janitor, Hank. Just imagine the whole thing being rotated so that the clamps are reaching out towards us. Up in the corner may be the oxygen tanks used in that trap. Hoffman also sees a mannequin from the mannequin factory on Stygian Street in Saw 1, where John narrowly evaded Sing and Tab. Another mannequin is seen on the other side of the room. There's also a cart with the scale used in the Pound of Flesh trap, the opener from Saw 6. The headgear from the Pound of Flesh is sitting on a shelf on the other side of the room, and the tubes that they had to send their offerings down to reach the scales are sitting behind the desk. Just beyond the scale is the hydrofluoric acid injection rack from the Rowan Zoological Institute, also from Saw 6. Also from the zoo is the little cage that William Easton had to put his hand into to determine who lives and who dies during the infamous shotgun carousel trap. These big gears appear to be the components that held up the giant ice blocks that eventually crushed Eric Matthews in Saw 4. Over to the right, behind the wall, we can see part of the rack from Saw 3. In front of the wall is a cage containing 4 shotguns. These are the quadruple shotguns that got Detective Sing in Saw 1. The chair that Hoffman grabs is fittingly the chair from the end of the last movie that Jill set up to shock him when he sat down. Of course, who could possibly forget the good old classics? Hoffman passes on the reverse bear trap 2.0 that Jill left him to die in at the end of the previous movie and opts for the Saw 1 original. On the left wall, there are more articles and evidence photos, including a very dapper looking shot of young Billy when he was doing the whole Pete Wentz look, which is right above the photo of John and Art Blank at the opening of Gideon Meatpacking Plant. If you look all the way to the right, partially obscured by the wall, you'll see the water cube trap that almost drowned Agent Strom in Saw 5. I'm not entirely sure about this because the lighting is different, but the device seen on top of the card on the right here may be the spinal contraption that Art Blank had to wear during his test in Saw 4, and these wheels could really be a number of things, but they may be the device that John used to manipulate the audio in his tapes. We see it in a flashback in Saw 4. So that's the evidence room, and that's the Saw saga. I do feel like I may not have gotten every little thing, so let me know if you caught any other references in the comments. The Saw series was thought to be over after the release of Saw 7 in 2010, but like many horror icons, Jigsaw could not be kept off the silver screen, and the franchise would return with Jigsaw in 2017. In 2010, the 7th Saw movie was released and dubbed as The Final Chapter, and that same year, the creators of the original Saw, Lee Winnell and James Wan, created a new franchise called Insidious. On the chalkboard in the background of Insidious is a sketch of a familiar face, Billy the Puppet from the Saw movies, accompanied by the number 8. This was the first ever clue about the 8th Saw movie, which would be released 7 years later and be titled Jigsaw. Jigsaw also contains many Easter eggs of its own, so stick around if you want to hear about them. It opens with the Lionsgate logo, but unlike many Saw films, this one uses the regular Lionsgate animation as opposed to the spooky one. I mean, what's going on here? Did they just forget? The first actual shot of the movie is this rolled up mat of tire spikes used to slow down a fleeing car, but the starburst-shaped image of the spikes also foreshadows the final scene of the movie, where we get a nice blooming bouquet of Halloran head. The man trying to escape the police is Edgar Munson, who has been pressured into finding the trigger that starts the 2016 edition of the Barn game. As he runs, we hear a cinematic cover of the main theme of the franchise, Hello Zep, with the melody being converted into percussion. Da-na-na, 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 da-na-na. He gets to the rooftop and finds the trigger hidden behind a red X. This is a callback to the idea of X marks the spot, which was a clue given by Jigsaw to the players of his games in Saw and Saw 2.
X marks the spot. What? X marks the spot for the answer.
But it would be Saw 2's X that most closely relates to the X seen in Jigsaw. In Saw 2, I discussed how the painting that contains the X was actually a clue about the movie's twist, how the game at the nerve gas house and the police raid of Wilson's steel plant could not have taken place at the same time, because this painting exists in both locations. We eventually find out that the nerve gas house stuff seen on the screens was just playback of events that had already happened many hours before. Jigsaw uses the same twist, only the game at the barn takes place many years before the stuff in the present. It's unlikely Jigsaw would use 2 X markers in the same game, so when we see a second X on the tractor later in the movie, that's a clue that this game isn't the same game as the one in the present. That may be the most cryptic clue, but it certainly isn't the only one. The movie is actually brimming with evidence that the barn game we see is John Kramer's earliest test game, taking place over a decade before Halloran begins to investigate the victim referred to as Buckethead. When Jigsaw's voice comes on for the first time, we don't see their facial reactions, but we can tell that they're scared, as anyone would be if they were kidnapped. In fact, they never refer to Jigsaw being their possible captor, because Jigsaw isn't even a known figure at this point. This is before the bathroom game or the razor wire trap.
That voice, it said salvation can be ours if we cleanse our soul of our lies.
They aren't even familiar with the concept of games yet, because the only trap so far was Cecil, which was never made public.
He said it was a game.
Well, then I hope for all of our sakes that it is a game.
Well, yeah, why is that, sweetheart?
This game's gonna be won.
Everyone acts scared when they see Billy, not because they recognize him from Jigsaw's tapes, but just because he's creepy on his own.
No, it's not creepy at all.
When Logan and Eleanor examine the first victim, there's another clue about the massive time gap.
The partial decapitation was made by a circular saw. The traces of ferric oxide, hematite in the wound.
Rust from blades.
When we saw the blades in the first room, they looked brand new, but after sitting there for over a decade, it makes sense that they might have accumulated some rust. There seems to be a moment in the final room where Anna recognizes John Kramer, but she recognizes him as her next door neighbor, not as the Jigsaw killer.
Hello, Anna.
John Kramer.
Then there's the issue of the victims themselves. The first victim, Buckethead as they call him, was Malcolm Neal, who was a criminal that Halloran tried to convict, so Nelson made him a part of his imitation version of John Kramer's barn game. Each player of the imitation game in 2016 bears a resemblance to someone from the original game in 2003. We never see Malcolm Neal's face, but we do see the faces of Carly from 2003 and her counterpart in 2016, and they're clearly not the same person. I'm not allowed to show a dead body, but I can show you the credits, where Carly and Carly lookalike are played by different actresses. For some reason, Mitch's lookalike is not in the credits, but if you go on IMDb, you can compare the two actors. They don't actually look that much alike, but since we only see Carly and Mitch's present-day counterparts covered in blood, it's a little harder to tell. But you definitely will notice it if you're looking for it. It gets a bit convoluted when we find out that Malcolm Neal's counterpart from the past is actually Nelson himself, who was put into the original barn game for messing up John Kramer's x-rays, but was bailed out because he didn't wake up in time, resulting in some deep lacerations on his back, which we see the scars of in the present-day storyline. And that's kind of confusing because he also put himself in the recreated game, but his counterpart is Malcolm Neal, not himself.
Jigsaw put 5 people in his game. I put in 3. You and I are the last 2.
So Carly's counterpart is Carly lookalike, Mitch's counterpart is Mitch lookalike, Logan Nelson's counterpart is Malcolm Neal, Ryan's counterpart is Logan Nelson, and Anna's counterpart is, I guess, Halloran. By itself, that might not be enough to figure it out, but the existence of a secret game that precedes the Saw saga is dangled in front of us by Eleanor.
Supposedly, John Kramer designed this trap for a game that took place before all the others. They found the plans in his lab. I built it myself.
Of course, we see that same trap in the barn game. When Eleanor and Logan go into the barn in the present, you can spot one of the bucket masks near the door, and it looks like it's been there rusting for years. So all of that adds up to make Jigsaw's twist ending kind of an homage to the "this game already happened" twist seen in Saw 2. Although I do think it's more satisfying in Saw 2 because we find out the same way that the characters find out, whereas Jigsaw is told out of order just to trick the audience, but I've come to appreciate it as just being there to honor the history of the franchise. There would be many other secrets that pay homage to other aspects of the Saw movies hidden inside of Jigsaw. A A couple of the supporting characters in Jigsaw seem to be spiritual successors to characters from the original series. Detective Keith Hunt originally appears to be the new version of SWAT officer Daniel Rigg, but we later find out he's with Internal Affairs just like Matt Gibson from Saw 7. There's also an unnamed doctor in Jigsaw who looks like she could be the sister of Lynn Denlin from Saw 3. Here's a side-by-side comparison. Not sure if this is intentional, I don't know how many people do this, but the doctor is also wearing her watch on the inside of her wrist, just like John Kramer does. The game itself also shares a ton of similarities to other traps and games that we've seen in the Saw series, and I think that because the barn game was essentially a test for Jigsaw before taking his games public, he could reuse many of these concepts in his later work. Let's look at the first room. There are many similarities to Saw 5, the most obvious being that we have 5 players with chains around their necks that are pulling them towards these dangerous blades. 60 seconds are given in both scenarios.
Today, 5 will become 1 with a common goal of survival. However, if one of you moves to retrieve a key, the 60-second timer will begin for you all.
Maybe this is a foreshadowing of the fact that the barn game requires players to work together, which is also what the Fatal 5 was tasked with figuring out.
It was meant for 5 people.
The final room of their trial asks for a blood sacrifice, just like the blade room in Jigsaw.
The device before you is one of sacrifice, a sacrifice of blood. First, an offering of blood, no matter how little, will give you a green light.
The blood sacrifice is one of many examples of Jigsaw intentionally making his teachings have these religious undertones. I pointed out examples throughout the Saw Things You Missed episodes, but in Jigsaw, it's on display more than ever. Listen to the way John Kramer addresses his followers.
Salvation can be yours if you cleanse yourselves of the habitual lies which have brought you here. Confess. The truth will set you free.
He also speaks not of rehabilitating his victims like he does during the Saw saga, but he mentions the need for them to release their demons.
If you can release yourself from your demons, you can begin to shed the chains that those demons bring with them.
Previous Saw movies tied into religion because John's traps represented the idea of suffering as a form of repentance for one's sins, while Jigsaw focuses more on confession, which is also what Logan's ultimate final plan is for Halloran.
Innocent people died because of me, I did it!
The most important part of his revenge is that he recorded this confession, and perhaps that is part of the reason that this movie's iteration of Billy the Puppet has unique glowing red eyes. A red light is the universal sign for recording. I've also theorized that it could be a foreshadowing of what happens to Carly after she's injected with the acid, because it causes blood to seep from her eyes, giving her the appearance of having red eyes. This happens after Jigsaw challenges her to choose the needle that represents how much she values a human life, with each one labeled to a specific dollar amount. The needle with the correct answer contains an antidote. This is a reference back to the Nerve Gas House game, where players must compete to win antidotes for a poison coursing through each of their systems. There's also a reference to the original Saw. After hearing Jigsaw explain the rules, the test subjects check themselves to see if they've been injected with anything.
Okay, check yourself for marks. Huh? If you injected us, there could be marks.
This is the same reaction Adam has shortly after waking up in the bathroom.
Can you see any scars? What? Huh? This is what they do, man. They kidnap you and drug you. Before you know it, you're lying in a bathtub and your kidneys are on eBay.
As I mentioned, Carly's lookalike shares a similar fate in the present. She's found to have been injected with hydrofluoric acid, the same substance that Jigsaw would go on to use in Saw 6 when hydrofluoric acid is injected into William Easton during the zoo game.
Hey, Chef. What does that stand for?
Hydrofluoric acid? This stuff will eat through human flesh within seconds.
The next trap of Kramer's barn game was also designed to drown us in Saw Easter eggs. It starts when Mitch and Anna go into a grain silo. They're buried alive in corn kernels, while Ryan is stuck on the outside with the ability to save them at his own personal expense. This is the exact setup that Jigsaw would one day use for the pig vat trap from Saw 3. In the pig vat, Jeff Denlin must decide whether or not to save the judge that sentenced his son's killer from being drowned in pig guts at the cost of burning the child's old possessions. There's another reference to the pig vat in Jigsaw. Remember that music I was jamming out to in my Saw 3 episode? For whatever reason, it's not in the original motion picture soundtrack for Saw 3. It may be because the riff is very similar to Eyes of the Insane by Slayer. So maybe they got a little bit nervous about copyright and decided not to put that part in the score. But the good news is there's a more finished version in Jigsaw. It plays during the cycle trap, where it's mostly drowned out by sound effects and dialogue, but luckily it's also in the end credits, and it did make it into the soundtrack this time. I personally love it when music has engine sounds as part of the mix for some reason. NASCAR-type theatrical hybrid event is probably my favorite Death Clock song, and Horsepower is the song that got me into Muzzy. Personally, I'm still holding out for the composer Charlie Clouser to play Knotfest. But the grain silo trap has more than just one Easter egg to offer, because after the thing fills up with kernels, sharp objects begin to rain down on the characters. The abandoned barn is owned by Jill Tuck's family. That's Jigsaw's ex-wife, if you don't remember. I've always wondered where John gets all of the weapons used to create his traps, and obviously they come from many sources. It seems like many of them could have been tools at the pig farm. Among the items that fall are circular saw blades, which are obviously a part of many traps, but most notably the ending of Jeff's trial. Knives, like those seen in Saw 4's knife chair trap. Stakes, which play a vital part in the spike trap from Saw 6. Meat hooks, which are used to hoist Bobby Dagan in Saw 7.
I'm gonna make this right.
And these mugs from the CZsWorld merch store. Wait, what is that doing in there? Next trap. Actually, before we even get to the next room, the dividers between these two rooms are the exact ones from the Gideon meatpacking plant in Saw 3 and 4. Just thought I'd point that out. But moving on, the next room is the human blender, and this iteration of it is powered by a motorcycle. This is Mitch's test, because he sold John's nephew a motorcycle one time and the brakes didn't work and the kid died. So his goal in this trap is to reach for the brake that will slow down this motorcycle. But that would not be the last trap that John Kramer creates, where the subject has to reach into danger to access the brake for an automobile. This pays tribute to the horsepower trap, the setup that proves fatal for Evan and his friends in Saw 7. After Mitch stars in the world's scariest episode of Will It Blend, only Anna and part of Ryan remain. They are subdued by John Kramer in a pig mask, and they next wake up in the slaughter room. I think this reference will be fairly obvious to Saw fans, but they each end up facing each other, each with an ankle and a shackle on opposite sides of the room. This scenario obviously calls back to Dr. Gordon and Adam's situation in the bathroom game.
I just woke up here, just like you.
But the trap scene in John Kramer's original barn game weren't only nostalgic references to traps and set pieces of the Saw saga that ran from 2004 to 2010. From Eleanor's studio to Nelson's apartment, there are still plenty more things you missed for us to explore. We can't let Jigsaw have all the fun in this episode, because this movie represents the passing of the torch to a new disciple, Logan Nelson. Early on, we see part of the reason that Nelson wants to test Detective Halloran.
Why do you think he asked for you?
We're good friends. Put him away to us.
Halloran was a corrupt cop, and at the end of the film, Nelson gets him to admit all of his wrongdoing by making him think that Jigsaw is back and threatening him with the laser collar. We actually see this payoff set up by Eleanor as they examine the first victim. She uses a singular laser cutter to remove the bucket fastened to his head. This does kind of raise some questions for me, like, if this thing cuts through steel, why doesn't it just cut all the way through the building? But we're not here to focus on that. We're here to talk about the flash drive that Logan pulls out of the victim, because it's a reference to an earlier Saw movie. You may remember when we talked about Saw 4, where the recently passed away Jigsaw has one final message for Detective Hoffman, a tape that he covers in wax and swallows for the pathologist to discover.
Where is it? He's in his stomach.
When Logan discovers the flash drive, he has to cut it out of the plastic wrapping that it's encased in before putting it into a computer to listen to the audio.
The games have begun again, and they will not stop until the sins against the innocent are atoned for.
When they get the results of the voice analysis back, Logan echoes one of Jigsaw's mottos: "We speak for the dead."
Just because someone is dead doesn't mean they can't have a voice.
Give us enough time, we speak for the dead.
It reminds me of the time Hoffman, who was secretly Jigsaw's successor at the time, used John's motto as part of his speech at a police press conference.
Throughout this ordeal, if we've learned anything, it's that human life is sacred. And we've learned that every day, life should be cherished.
And speaking of Hoffman, I've got a little something for all of you Hoffman is alive people. There's the scene where we see Hunt walking through the police station, and in the background there's a board of wanted posters. If Hoffman was alive, don't you think that Hoffman would be on here? The only possibility really is that he's alive, but he's in jail. Last time we saw him, he was left in the bathroom to die. Now we know that the bathroom was eventually discovered because in Eleanor's studio there's a replica of the hacksaws, which were only ever used at the bathroom. She also has a replica of the Magnum eye-hole trap, which is in the room with the stairs that lead down to the tunnel network where the bathroom is. Though it is possible that her recreation of the Magnum eye-hole was based entirely off of blueprints, but as far as the hacksaw goes, I can't really imagine that there would be blueprints for that. Plus, even if there were for some reason, she wouldn't know that they were significant unless the bathroom was discovered. My point is, they probably did discover it, but Hoffman was probably dead by the time they got there. Other than the Magnum eye-hole, there are replicas of many other iconic Saw traps seen in Eleanor's studio. There's the Angel trap, which Detective Carey was caught in during Saw 3. The water cube that Special Agent Strom escaped in Saw 5. The reverse bear trap. This is the model used against Amanda Young in Saw and Jill Tuck in Saw 7. This might be the razor box from Saw 2. It's hard to tell for sure, but I feel like we will see this location again in a future film. The closet is a hidden door, which is one of the recurring staples of the franchise, and in the closet there's a copy of the knife on a chain from the pound of flesh trap in Saw 6. The inside of the closet is a shrine to Jigsaw and contains the actual newspaper headlines seen throughout the 7 past movies. She also has an evidence marker just like those used at the Jigsaw crime scenes and what appears to be the black hair from either Billy the Puppet or the pig masks. At one point we actually get a better look at one of the newspapers that appeared in Saw 4, but in that movie it was too blurry to actually make out any of the text. It gives us a few more Saw 4 Easter eggs, but I think it makes sense that I include them in this video since they're only readable in Jigsaw. They are, as usual, the writers of these articles being named after the film crew of the 4th movie. Ryan Huppanen was the art production coordinator, Ashley Millar worked craft services in a rare on-screen appearance for the snack department, and Pauline Kwong was a payroll accountant. And no, that is not a racial stereotype joke. Look it up. In the cemetery scene, there's a headstone labeled Armstrong. The biggest difference between Jigsaw and the Saw movies is the cinematography. David Armstrong was the cinematographer of Saws 1 through 6, and his style was emulated in Saw 7. So to me, this tombstone represents the death of the Armstrong look. Or maybe they just filmed in an actual cemetery and this just happened to be there. If anybody lives in Toronto, let me know. I mean, I know people live in Toronto, obviously. You know what I meant. As far as references to other stuff outside the franchise, there's not much. Unless you want to call this a reference to Wolverine or Freddy Krueger. I'm not sure that I want to. But there does seem to be one reference to an outside work, but I can't take credit for finding it. So I'm not going to. Roll the clip.
Apparently, critics have noted a structural similarity between the Saw films and French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre's famous play, No Exit. So I watched all 7 movies, read No Exit, and immediately called bullshit. The connection was too tenuous. Then Jigsaw came out, and when I saw this, I was like, huh.
I'll leave the link in the description if you want to see his whole video, but the basic gist of it is that this play, No Exit, is all about the torture of confessing and being judged for one's sins by others. That's the reason that Jigsaw in this movie tortures his victims by asking them to confess in front of the group, as opposed to a physical torture seen in the previous entries. Maybe that's the reason that Jigsaw's credits bring back the music from the pig vat trap, because that's like the one other trap in the series that focuses much more on psychological torture. So Jigsaw redefines what it means to experience torture, and it would also redefine one of the long-running symbols of the franchise, the pigs. In a previous video, I mentioned that one of the main characters in the movie, Detective Halloran, doesn't have a name other than Halloran. Well, I'm proud to announce that I, CZsWorld, have discovered Halloran's first name. It's Brad. He's a Brad. They say that finding this name is as rare as finding Obama's last name, so make sure you like this video just for that alone. When Eleanor is putting together the pathology report on the first victim, she discovers traces of pig fecal matter found to contain Odrzeski's disease.
When swine get it, farmers have to wipe out the entire sander.
In all of the other Saw movies, pigs represent the rebirth of John's followers. They're metaphorically leaving their crimes, or at least what Jigsaw perceives as crimes, in a previous life. It seems like in Jigsaw, though, the meaning of the pig symbol has been expanded to where pigs are now also a sign of compassion.
Did you know that pigs are highly compassionate animals? They show distress if they see any other animal, including humans. suffering.
John's goal has always been to make his subjects endure suffering, open their eyes, and make them appreciate their lives again. If they survive, they become his followers and wear the pig mask to help spread John's message to others. That's why it's significant that the barn game takes place in a pig farm. Each of them represents one of his pigs. They can either win and become his followers or lose and be slaughtered. The final room, which was to be their final test, is the slaughter room. But throughout the game, he doesn't actually have followers yet, so he's seen wearing the pig mask himself during the past storyline. In the present storyline, it appears that John Kramer, or one of his disciples, is back again and holding new games. And at the end of the movie, Logan and Eleanor go to hunt him down. During these scenes, Eleanor is wearing a leopard print jacket, and leopards are a natural predator of many wetland hogs and boar. In other words, leopards hunt pigs. And although that was Eleanor's intention, she ends up having to run from the pig farm, where she's picked up by a driver. We never see who it is, but she looks kind of distressed and confused when she sees the person. Could it be Dr. Gordon? Daniel? Corbett? Only time will tell.
Literally! Because I'm building a time machine to find out!
Oh my god, that's a terrible idea! So we eventually come to learn that Logan Nelson was actually Jigsaw's apprentice all along, and he was putting himself in the game at the end there, just as John did, just as Amanda did, and just as Hoffman did. But how did he make this whole thing work? Let's take a look back at it. There was a lot of background work required by Nelson, such as sneaking back into St. Peter's Hospital to kidnap Edgar Munson, digging up John Kramer's grave, and depositing the bodies of the recreated game throughout the city for Brad Halloran to find. I guess we are to believe that he just stays up and does all this stuff overnight based on what he tells his daughter's babysitter.
I'm sorry you have to stay so late again, Judy.
There's also a clue about him being connected to Jigsaw in his study, where you can spot one of those little Buddhist figures in his bedroom, just like the ones first seen at John Kramer's deathbed, among other appearances throughout the series. When Brad looks into Logan Nelson's bio on the Veterans Affairs database, there's a lot of background information about his time during and after serving in the army. There's a lot to cover here that helps explain why he never helped Jigsaw during the Saw saga. If you're interested, I made a whole video on the history of Logan Nelson. When Eleanor shows him to the studio, they're tailed by Hunt, who I can already tell is a better evidence photographer than Adam because he doesn't blatantly use flash in a dark room. But Logan was still later able to convince Hunt that Brad Halloran was setting him up. By the time Hunt gives his people the order to arrest Brad, he's already tailing Logan and Eleanor. They end up essentially leading him into his own tomb. I noticed that the situation is very similar to what Hoffman does to Peter Strahm in Saw 5. Actually, it's not very similar, it's exactly the same. He makes J. Jonah Jameson suspicious of Strahm, he knows Strahm is following him, and he leads him right into his final trap. Brad finds himself in the slaughter room, where he and Logan both appear to be imprisoned by these collars, and Logan uses an old Saw trick to get him to make his confession. The lasers on Logan's collar are fake, and so is the blood that spurts out when the lasers zero in on him. We've seen Adam do it, we've seen Jigsaw do it, we've seen Daniel Matthews do it, we've seen Eric Matthews do it, and now we would see Logan Nelson play dead to get the upper hand on his opponent. As I mentioned way back at the beginning, after a confession, we see the Brad flower bloom into 8 petals as we would come to the end of the 8th movie. I have got to get a slidey door like that, so I can game over all of my guests.
I speak for the dead.
Or that. Throughout the Saw franchise, there have been many symbols and images associated with Jigsaw, from puzzle pieces to spirals to the pigs, which are hidden in many of the crime scenes in this 9th movie. The very first victim is targeted at a carnival, where you can spot this pig on the funhouse mural, and a man holding a pig balloon. The meaning behind the pig symbol has changed a couple of times now. It started as a reference to the year of the pig in the Chinese zodiac, which was representative of the Eastern ideas that Jigsaw incorporated into his teachings, and at some point it became a symbol of compassion towards those in suffering.
Did you know that pigs are highly compassionate animals? They show distress if they see any other animal, including humans, suffering.
In Spiral, there's a new Jigsaw copycat who has a new context for the use of the pig symbol. It's a reference to the derogatory term that people sometimes use towards police officers. The new killer is targeting dirty cops, and so he ironically uses the pig costume and symbol to give them a taste of their own brutality. That's why the puppet avatar has been changed this time to a creepy pig. Perhaps the dirtiest police officer, Detective Fitch, even has a coffee mug decorated with pig imagery. He discovers a pig mask shortly before going into his trap, and a pig falls out of the car when the police discover where the killer deposited Fitch's fingers. Other less noticeable pig symbols include the pig models displayed in the butcher shop where one of the other victims is discovered, including this adorable little pig chef, and the pig mask hiding in the background as Zeke enters the church to find Pete Dunleavy, his #1 suspect. The movie stars Chris Rock, Max Minghella, Marisol Nichols, and Samuel L. Jackson. Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed Saws 2, 3, and 4, is back to direct Spiral, and I noticed some references to some of his other work hidden in graffiti around the city. In addition to making movies, he's also done these immersive theatrical experiences. Basically, expensive haunted houses where you sign a waiver, but instead of the actors trying to scare you, they just try to make you really uncomfortable. His first one was in 2016 and called The Tension Experience, and its logo can be seen graffitied on a pillar at the 12th Street Bridge. The next year, he followed that up with The Lust Experience, whose logo is seen spray painted on a wall at the courthouse. These experiences have their own lore, which is also referenced. BOS stands for Brotherhood of Seraph, a group inside the Tension Experience universe. The parcel delivery company is OSDM, which stands for Oracle Security and Data Management, a fictional company featured in The Lust Experience. The movie opens with the normal, not spooky Lionsgate logo. Detective Marv Boswick is lured away from the 4th of July carnival when he chases a purse thief. Ironically, stealing a purse was a punishable offense in the eyes of John Kramer in the previous movie Jigsaw. When Boswick gets down into the subway tunnel, he realizes he's been bamboozled when his suspect has been replaced by a mannequin. That could have been his first clue that he was dealing with a Jigsaw copycat. You may remember John's first ever workshop in Saw 1 was in a mannequin factory. We come to learn that the new copycat, Detective Shank, believes in John Kramer's philosophy, but has his own ideas about who it should be applied to.
John Kramer was right. Spiral. Symbol of change, evolution, progress. But why limit that to an individual when you can apply it to a whole system?
So it makes sense that a lot of Shank's traps seem to be evolutions of the Jigsaw traps. The subway trap is a lot like the classroom trap from Saw 3. Each one requires the victim to tear something out of their body to escape before time runs out. There are also obvious parallels to the trap from Jill's dream in Saw 7, and yes, I prefer to call it Saw 7 instead of Saw 3D, so get used to it. But I'm not actually counting this one as an inspiration for Shank because it was just a dream. We have no proof that it was ever a real trap. It is interesting how it contains the Spiral logo though. There are a couple of red herrings that could be placed to lead the audience into thinking that certain characters are responsible for the subway trap. Chief Banks seems to be a train fanatic and decorates his apartment with pictures of locomotives, and the drug dealer has a 9 3/4 tattoo, a reference to the famous magical train platform in Harry Potter. Boz is unable to escape the subway trap on time, and the train that hits him has a big IX on the front. The Saw films have always been labeled with Roman numerals, and this is the numeral for the number 9. Spiral is the 9th film in the franchise. Then we meet Detective Zeke Banks, who is working undercover with a gang of thieves who are in a heated discussion about the fate of Forrest Gump.
I ain't seen no sequel. Where's Gump 2?
It's almost like a statement to the fans about Mark Hoffman. Hoffman was Jigsaw's successor, the main villain of movies 4 through 7, who was assumed dead after being game overed in his last appearance. He didn't appear in the next sequel, Jigsaw. This isn't a perfect analogy though. For one, there is a sequel to Forrest Gump. The novel just never got a movie adaptation like the first one did. And for two, Josh Stolberg, the co-screenwriter of Jigsaw and Spiral, who's probably the most likely candidate to write Saw 10, has publicly tweeted about the issue, stating that while he didn't write the last movie to include Hoffman, he personally thinks that he's alive. Speaking of Hoffman, you'll notice that this isn't the same police station that Hoffman annihilated in Saw 7. That was the Metro PD 13th Precinct, while this is the South Metro Police Station. So we're dealing with a different part of the same city. But there is a nice reference to the 13th Precinct in this movie. Perhaps both buildings were created by the same architect, because the evidence room in Spiral has a very similar layout to the evidence room from Saw 7. Detective Banks gets the call to investigate the train accident. It's impossible to say for sure, but is that Saw 1 director James Wan sitting by the window on the train? One interesting thing about Spiral is that nearly every previous Saw director was involved in some way. James Wan was an executive producer, Darren Lynn Bousman directed it, David Hackle was a visual consultant, and Kevin Grusert was an executive producer. That leaves the Spierig brothers, who directed Jigsaw, as the only Saw directors not to work on Spiral. However, I did find a detail that may in fact be a massive Jigsaw connection. It comes when Zeke is interrogating Boswick's wife. Roll it.
In the last few weeks, did you notice anything unusual?
There was one thing. There was a black SUV parked outside one night last week, and he went out. And he walked up, and I don't know, the next thing I know, he was yelling at somebody inside.
This is never brought up again in the movie, which I find a little strange. Jigsaw also had unanswered questions like this. For example, when the pathologist Eleanor makes it out of the pig farm, she waves down a car, then looks concerned as she sees who's driving it. We can't really tell if it's black, but it does look to be roughly the size of an SUV. Nelson also drives a gray SUV. It could look black at night. Maybe a future sequel will provide the answer. We never really get any follow-up about Zeke's wife and kid either, just as Logan Nelson's kid was a seemingly unfinished storyline in Jigsaw. As the police realize they've got a Jigsaw copycat on their hands, they study what they know about John Kramer, including this screenshot from Saw 4, 4, mugshots of Abby Tate and Addison Corday from Saw 2, magazine and newspaper articles from various movies, primarily Saw 4, this photo of John, which is from the Journal of Civil Engineering, first seen in Saw 4, and this screenshot of Billy the Puppet, which is from the classroom trap in Saw 3. In addition to all of that, the corkboards contain maps and photos from the night of Detective Boswick's death and photos of what appears to be another crime scene involving a knife. This may in fact be a leftover from a scene that was cut from the movie. Apparently this trap involved someone's face getting cut off, and they had to submit the film to the Motion Picture Association 11 times just to get it down to an R rating. One thing I've always had fun pointing out in my previous Saw franchise Things You Missed episodes is the crew reference Easter eggs, and this scene has a few of them. The police search Twitter for photos taken in Stewart's Point that night for anything that might help them to identify the suspect. Noelle99 and Nina C aren't crew members, but remember those names, I'll come back to them later. The first one is Rafael Pacheco, a visual effects coordinator. In the corner, there's a prompt to follow a user named Kiki Singh, who is probably related to Spiral's editor, Dev Singh. Just a side note, I love the idea that police work is done by just Googling phrases related to the date of the crime. He just has tabs open with searches for July 4 night, July 4 event, and July 4 case, as if somebody has already solved the case and just posted the answers online. We also get a little glimpse of his email inbox, where he's had exchanges with John C., which is likely visual effects supervisor John Campfins. There are more names to spot on Detective Jury's tablet, like Nina Campfins and Noelle Campfins. They aren't listed in the credits, but they're probably related to VFX supervisor John Campfins. You'll also see Bo Parsons. Bo is another visual effects supervisor, and Sean Morris, special effects technician, no relation. The next police officer to find himself in a trap is Detective Fitch, who becomes the victim of the finger trap. If each trap is inspired by one of the original traps created by John Kramer, this one definitely draws from the electric bathtub from Saw 5, with the source of the danger being the combination of water and electricity. It's possible that this was foreshadowed in the opening shot of the movie, where one of the carnival games offers Pokemon plushies as prizes. Specifically, you can win Squirtle or Pikachu, the water type and the electric type Pokemon respectively. The Ferris wheel was even blue and yellow. Amanda would be rocking out if she was still here. The finger trap begins at the sound of the buzzer, which sounds exactly like the buzzer from the pig vat trap in Saw 3. We hear the sound again later on in the glass grinder trap, where it's used to signal the beginning of the flying glass shards. The finger trap is designed to take away Fitch's overactive trigger fingers. It's interesting to see an actual Saw trap that takes away your fingers, because the poster for Saw 2 features a pair of severed fingers, but there's no finger severing scene in the movie, so I guess it was a long time coming. The trap also takes place at a location called the Nesbitt Brothers Breads. Michael Nesbitt is the movie's assistant art director. Not having heard from his father, Zeke goes to his apartment to check on him. He comes across the old photo of him and his dad at Constantine's hobby shop. This is another crew reference Easter egg. Jason Constantine was one of Spiral's executive producers. A new package containing another flash drive is delivered to the police station the next day, and we get a short glimpse of Zeke's computer screen before he plugs it in. It seems he's looking up an event from 11/11/2004, where two males got into a fight in a parking lot. I don't think this report is relevant to the story at all, as these descriptions don't match any important Saw characters, but I would note that this would have been a matter of weeks after the bathroom game in Saw 1. The date 11/11 is also significant for the director Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed a horror film titled 11/11/11 about strange events occurring on that date. The clues lead Zeke and Shank to investigate this meth dealer who may have ties to their suspect.
You think we have enough for a warrant, though?
Who said anything about a warrant?
Don't we need a warrant for this?
What you talking about?
The whole scene is packed with Easter eggs from Saw 4 and 5. You can tell we're about to get into a throwback when they enter the grimy apartment building with a green tinge, the signature aesthetic of the first 7 films. I'm first reminded of Officer Riggs' foray into the Alexander Motel in Saw 4, where he blows by a morbidly obese man in a tank top to go up the stairs. Here we see Zeke and Shank do the same. At the top of the stairs, there's a room completely illuminated in red, just like the room where Rigg finds the evidence in the motel. On the way up the stairs, Zeke is confronted by an aggressive dog. This is almost like a perfect reenactment of the scene at Mark Hoffman's apartment in Saw 5. Another Saw trope brought back in Spiral is the idea of the killer being disguised as a victim of the game. In Saw 1 it was John, in Saw 2 it was Amanda, in Saw 4 it was Hoffman, and in Jigsaw it was Nelson. This time, Detective Shank makes it appear as if he's been killed, only to reveal that he did this by leaving his tattoo on the real victim's arm. There's also a nice detail in this scene where they go to interrogate Pete. Pete is the one who shot Shank's father, and Shank stays back behind his partner out of fear of possibly being recognized, even though he was just a kid when they last met. The next victim is the police captain, Angie Garza. She is trapped inside the evidence room by the pig-masked Shank. It makes sense because only a police officer would be able to get into this room. The door to the evidence room is secured by Vincent and Jules Safe Company. If that sounds familiar, it's because Vincent and Jules are the two main characters in the 1994 crime movie Pulp Fiction. Jules was played by actor Samuel L. Jackson, who also plays Chief Marcus Banks in Spiral. Marcus Banks is the father of Zeke Banks, and the only character to call him by his full name.
Ezekiel.
This may be a reference to Pulp Fiction, where one of the most famous scenes features Samuel L. Jackson quoting a Bible verse called Ezekiel 25:17. Anyway, Captain Garza is put into the wax trap, which will smother her face in hot wax if she's unable to sever her spinal cord with the blade under her neck. It's not really clear how this trap works mechanically, but there are a number of Jigsaw traps that share the same concept of drowning or smothering the victim if they can't complete their task on time. From the pig vat in Saw 3, to the water cube in Saw 5, to the silo in Jigsaw. With those that he is deemed to be bad cops out of the way, Shank is ready for the finale of his plan and kidnaps Zeke, who awakens chained to a pipe. Obviously, this is a callback to the beginning of the first movie, so I'm not even going to count that on the things you missed, but after escaping, he discovers Pete, who is caught in the last Jigsaw-inspired trap, the glass grinder. This one is just like the freezer room from Saw 3. The only difference is that instead of the victim being sprayed with freezing water while someone tries to find the key to set them free, Pete is getting sliced apart by shards of glass. Shank's hideout is in an abandoned soap factory. This is another common trait shared with Jigsaw, who always used abandoned factories as his hideouts and locations for his games. It even has the obligatory sliding door, although nobody says the iconic line "game over" in this one. The final trap is the puppet trap, where Chief Banks is hung up on strings and Zeke must decide between saving him or killing Shank. This one isn't really inspired by a Jigsaw trap from what I can tell, but the explanation of the trap is definitely familiar. Roll it.
You know there's 1.5 gallons of blood in the human body, Zeke?
At the rate your old man's bleeding out, in just 3 minutes, those jars will be full.
And your dad will be dead.
The human body, for instance, is an astoundingly durable creation. It contains approximately 10 pints of blood, yet it is still able to operate with just half of that.
10 pints is only equal to 1.25 gallons. I looked it up, and I guess the average body has 1.2 to 1.5 gallons of blood, so they're kind of both right in a way. This trap not only takes place behind this wall graffitied with Jigsaw's spiral symbol, but it's also located at the top of a spiral staircase. Well, kind of. After a classic Saw-style montage, Detective Shank, or if we're calling him by his real name, William Emerson, slips away in an elevator, just as Jigsaw did way back in Darren Lynn Bousman's first Saw movie, Saw 2. In Saw X, John seeks out alternative medical treatment for his brain cancer, but ends up getting scammed by a doctor offering a fake remedy to his illness. But he is far from the only victim. The scammer has an entire list of cancer patients she's cleaned out, like E. Edwards, S. Izuko, Sean Humphreys, and G. Romero. G. Romero is a reference to legendary horror director George Romero, known for his classic zombie franchise Night of the Living Dead. In Saw X, records show that G. Romero was conned for $263,000 before he died of lung cancer. The real-life George Romero passed away in 2017 at the age of 77 after a battle with lung cancer. The list of victims contains at least one other Easter egg. G. Collin is a reference to Gabriel Colin Cruz, the concept artist / graphic artist on Saw X, probably the guy who made this list. It's possible that Jay Carson is a reference to famous TV host Johnny Carson, but it may just be a coincidence, because while the real Johnny Carson did die, it was not related to brain cancer. The others that stuck out to me were C. Edwards, which isn't a reference but makes me think of Carl Edwards Jr. because I'm a Cubs fan, and Kay Green, which reminds me of this character from Weezer's Trippin' Down the Freeway. Don't ask me why my brain works the way it does. Saw X is, as the title suggests, the 10th entry in the long-running Saw franchise, but it was only the 9th to be conceived. Supposedly, writers Josh Stolberg and Pete Goldfinger started work on the script as early as January 2018, 3 months after the release of Jigsaw and 3 years before the first trailer for Spiral. But with Spiral being more of a new beginning, Saw X represents a return to the original saga in more ways than one. From the gritty visuals to the return of Tobin Bell as John Kramer and the return of Kevin Grutert to direct. direct. The question was, would this be more like Grutert's beloved Saw 6 or his maligned Saw 7? Well, it's a little bit of both. Chronologically, X is a sequel to the first Saw, but thematically, it's really more of a prequel for Saw 6, which, as you may remember, dealt with the trial of William Easton, who was forced to decide which of his employees would live or die, the same way that his health insurance company had to make life-altering decisions about which patients received coverage. It contains a scene where John tries to get the insurance company to pay for an alternative treatment in Norway, and Saw X is all about John trying to get that treatment.
I read about a doctor, a specialist of sorts, a Dr. Finn Peterson. He offered a treatment, a groundbreaking drug cocktail combined with surgery.
Hold up, who is this Finn Peterson? In Saw 6, the doctor's name was Soren Popescu. He's one of the most iconic Saw characters, other than Rich Skidmore, of course. We do learn that Dr. Peterson has been forced to go into hiding because he was on the cusp of curing many diseases, meaning that drug companies would be put out of business. This is something that appeals to John, who disagrees with the healthcare system in the West. Maybe Finn Peterson had to change his name to stay out of legal crosshairs of the drug companies, and Soren Popescu is a pseudonym. This character just gets more and more interesting. The doctor's exile is why his daughter, Cecilia, is supposedly taking over the practice and operating out of Mexico in a secret location. Saw X begins with John lying in the dark and sitting up out of an MRI machine. There's a parallel here with the opening of the original Saw, where Adam Stanheidt sits up in a dark room, finding himself kidnapped and chained to a bathtub. Not only is this a sign that we're returning to the aesthetics of the first Saw, but also a little clue for the audience that this time, John Kramer will find himself stuck in one of the traps. We see him spending time at a support group for cancer survivors.
Today is a gift. That's why they call it the present.
I think the leader of the group should be put into a Saw trap just for that joke. It's kind of ironic that John needs to attend a cancer support group. It's a bit of a narrative refrain, because his cancer is what motivated his games. He wanted to make people appreciate their lives. But the survivors of those games would eventually need to be part of a support group of their own, the Jigsaw Survivor Support Group. One of the group members is named Henry Kessler, who would later approach John at a cafe. By the way, the woman working at the cafe is played by Bailey Guidry, also known as Jigsaw Girl, a TikToker who makes based content about Saw lore with excellent backgrounds. After Henry tells John about the cancer treatment, John goes home to email the doctor. His email is kramerjohn994@gmail.com. In April 2024, I received an email from johnkramer755@gmail.com, which is very similar. It came through my website's contact form, just like how John reached out to Dr. Peterson. It said, "Hello, I want to play a game, the choice is yours." To which I said, usually this part comes after the kidnapping. This triggered an automatic response. "Hello, thank you for reaching out. I will be traveling out of the country the next few days, so I may be slow to respond to any messages. If this an emergency, please give me a call at 1-310-564-8144. By the time I got around to making this video, the number had been repurposed as an ad for the strangers.
Tamara here?
But you can find the original Saw message on YouTube.
Hello there. Thank you for reaching out. A very brave thing to do. I hear that you're looking for a restart, a cleanse. But I must ask, are you sure this is the right path for you? What you are about to experience will truly put you to the test. A test unlike any other that you've faced before. If you'd still like to proceed, simply text, "I want to play a game," to this phone number for your first challenge. Good luck.
Apparently, texting John just resulted in you getting Saw X teasers in your inbox. ARGs aren't what they used to be. John did reply to my email though, 17 minutes later. He said "game over" with a picture of Billy the Puppet. So just for kicks, I tried the email address seen in the movie. "Hello John, are you back from Mexico yet?" And I just got the same automated response. I can't help but wonder if my attempt to email Hoffman a while back was a partial inspiration for this marketing campaign. But it feels kind of a waste that the email seen in the movie is just part of a sequence that gets you teasers for that movie that you've now already seen. There are a few other examples of contact info seen, like John and Diego's phone numbers, which are both 555 numbers, so they won't work. In the deleted scenes, we also see an email address for William Easton and Cecilia Peterson. I tried emailing both. Cecilia's email address didn't exist, and William's didn't trigger a response. But luckily, those were not the only secrets the deleted scenes had to offer. Many Saw movies look to make a statement about some kind of current issue, whether that be the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, the criminal justice system again, or in this case, phishing scams against old people and medical tourism scams. According to the FBI, over 100,000 victims aged 60 and over fell victim to elder fraud in 2023, and I assume this is just in the United States, resulting in over $3.4 billion lost. It is a fact that John Kramer was only in his early 50s in Saw X, but I mean, look at him, I think the comparison still stands. We see John falling victim to what's known as a medical tourism scam. Mexico is a common place for Americans to engage in medical tourism because of the comparatively low cost of healthcare, sometimes half of what it costs in the United States. But doing so comes with a lot of risk.
Experts warn that traveling abroad for medical purposes can be dangerous.
It's this medical tourism that happens apparently all the time as Americans try to save a little money, but it's not always safe.
How safe is this medical tourism, and what's it really costing you?
Medical tourism is a relevant issue for Saw X because it first gained popularity in the 2000s when the movie takes place, and it's been surging in the early 20s thanks to a backlog of availability for surgeries caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not just lower prices that'll cause people to travel for a procedure, it's also a way to make it happen sooner. According to this article on the risks of medical tourism, in many countries, scammers can obtain professional credentials and institutional licenses through fraud or in exchange for bribes. Or some countries may not have a system of credentials like in the US. A segment from medical talk show The Doctors adds that if something does go wrong, it can be a lot harder to recover your money or file a lawsuit, and doctors in the US may not cover the necessary post-operative care. It seems like the majority of medical tourism scams involve a scam artist who isn't qualified and is therefore at risk of botching the procedure, a scammer who prescribes surgeries that aren't needed, or a practice that cuts corners to save money, resulting in potentially deadly outcomes. I didn't find any real stories of scammers who only pretended to operate while not actually doing anything at all, like what happened to John, but there are other parallels. For example, Cecilia Peterson arranges for John to be transported by a taxi driver, who turns out to be in on the scam. This story from the International Association for Medical Assistance to Travelers warns about taxi drivers who take commissions from private clinics. The drivers will bring sick tourists to their friend's practice, and the doctors will overcharge, suggest unnecessary treatments, and require cash and credit card payments. This one is less about medical tourism and more about unsuspecting victims who happen to get sick on vacation. They recommend that if you're in an unfamiliar place, don't just hop in a cab and ask to be taken to a hospital. Do your research and ask to go somewhere specific. On the way to the location where John is going to be treated, the scammers stage a kidnapping under the guise that they need to keep their location a secret in case John is one of their enemies in the pharmaceutical industry. It reminds me of this story of 4 Americans who were kidnapped while traveling in Mexico for cosmetic surgery. The second level to all this is the idea that they were able to scam John because of his age.
So tell me, John, you've been doing this for a very long time, haven't you? How did I stop you? Am I just that good?
Don't flatter yourself. I just had a lapse in judgment.
In fact, there are a lot of red flags throughout the entire opening, things that a younger person would probably catch, but John doesn't. When he searches up Dr. Finn Peterson, all of the results come from fake-sounding websites like Article 3, M Article, and Medical Article 5. Apparently domain names aren't necessary in the Saw universe, but either way, the fact that there's no coverage from reputable sites is our first clue. And the same can be said about the broadcast that he watches on Video Broadcast. We can see that this is a page on the PetersonProject.net website, but it's made to look like a video hosting site similar to YouTube. This is set in late 2004, by the way, so it was actually a little bit before YouTube was invented. Having 117,000 views on something like this would have been pretty much impossible back then, as would streaming in HD, and the channel name is just Medical Channel. It sounds like one of those titles that is so generic, it just had to be created by a scammer. By the way, in the current day, you can check for this icon that shows on videos made by real medical professionals. You wouldn't want your savage medical meme reactions coming from a fraud after all. But one of the biggest red flags about the scam isn't related to technology at all.
The results have been stunning. Over a 90% success rate.
There's an old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Currently, for patients in John's age range, such a surgery only has a 9% success rate. Scammers love using ridiculous figures to overwhelm their victims, making them blind to the obvious logic. Think about the classic Nigerian prince scam, where an unsolicited emailer promises the victim millions of dollars in the future as a reward for spotting him just a couple thousand today while he doesn't have access to his funds. It seems ridiculous to me, but as I mentioned early on, it disproportionately affects people that are old and people that are desperate. And due to his cancer diagnosis, John falls under both categories. It's hard for me to fully understand the mindset of someone who falls for these scams, but what I always hear is that it works because the scammers are preying on hope. A while back, I saw this catfished video about a woman who sent her life savings to a scammer, in gift cards of course, because she was caught up in a love scam. Everyone around her straight up told her it was a scam. She was being documented by this film crew, and they were telling her it was a scam, but it didn't matter. She was so lonely lonely after her husband died, and she wanted so badly for this relationship to be real that she couldn't see any other scenario. And that seems to be what's going on with John here. He's dying, and there's nothing he can do to stop it, and all of a sudden, there's this miraculous hope, and he latches onto it. But unlike the catfished woman, he eventually sees the error of his ways, which is made obvious when he removes his wrap and finds that they didn't even bother to shave his head. So he sets out to rehabilitate the culprits. The whole thing kind of recontextualizes Saw 6, doesn't it? I'm not saying William Easton was a perfect saint, but he sure was doing John a favor by denying the medical coverage to seek out this alternative medicine. After landing in Mexico, the cab driver points out the Monument to the Revolution and Angel of Independence. Both are dedicated to Mexico's War of Independence from Spain. It's somewhat symbolic because John Kramer has come to this country to be independent from the corrupt medical system in the US, though that's about to backfire. But exactly when does this all take place? I've done a whole video on the Saw timeline, which was made before Saw X was released. In that video, I placed Saw X in late 2004 or early 2005 based on the information available in the trailer. John's arrival date at the treatment center is set for Friday the 5th.
What date did you have in mind?
The 5th, Friday after next.
This leaves two possible dates, November 5th, 2004 or August 5th, 2005. Later, after his surgery, we see him sketching in his notebook with the date 11/7 listed at the top of the page. So I'm going with November 2004 for my timeline placement of Saw X. But this isn't an episode of horror history, and there are other secrets we can glean from the insides of John's sketchbook. Given the tight continuity of the series, every Saw is packed with Easter eggs and references to the other movies. And while Saw X is lighter on this, there are still plenty of examples. During the opening, we see the last will and testament of John Kramer, the legal document that divvies up his assets after his death. We saw this come into play in the 5th and 6th movies, when his ex-wife Jill inherited some items related to his final request to test William Easton and Mark Hoffman. We don't see the entire will, and it's possible that he changed it at some point, but it would appear that John planned the game at Rowan Zoological Institute, aka the Saw 6 game, much earlier than some of the others. I say this because of our next Easter egg. While chilling at the park after his surgery, John can be seen sketching up plans for the rack, the trap used to test Timothy Young in Saw 3. On the next page we see this. It's not entirely clear what it is, but it could be an early version of the blood sacrifice trap from the final room of the Fatal Fives trial in Saw 5, where the players had to stick their hand into a spinning saw blade and sacrifice enough blood to fill the beaker. In the deleted scenes for Saw X, there's another page of mock-ups for the rack, as well as a page with the design for the Magnum eye hole, which would appear less than a year later in Saw 2. Most of the other Saw references call back to the first one. Diego the cab driver's test is explained on an old Panasonic RN305, the same tape recorder Jigsaw used in the original. The test subjects Mateo and Gabriella realize that there's a cell phone nearby, and their initial plan is to make a clothing rope to reach it, which is just how Adam reached the tape recorder in Saw 1. And there's exactly one shot of the clock, where it's displaying the time 5:01, a potential callback to the original where Adam and Dr. Gordon had until 6 to win their game.
Your aim in this game is to kill Adam. You have until 6 on the clock.
Speaking of Adam, one of Cecilia's lines in the deleted scenes seems to be a direct reference to him.
We are liars. Both of us.
Face it, Larry, we're both bullshitters.
When John pulls off his head bandages to reveal the lie that's been sold to him, he does so in the exact same way that he pulled off his injury prosthetic at the end of the bathroom game, which revealed his lie to Adam. One recurrent symbol in the franchise is obviously the spiral, one of Jigsaw's calling cards. When Gabriella brings out the bottle of tequila for John before his surgery, the glasses have the spiral symbol on them as well. Obviously, this is more of a coincidence than anything. It's not like Gabriella is in league with John or something, just a little Easter egg for the fans. I'm not sure if this next one is a reference per se, or if they're just running out of ideas for traps, but the bloodboarding trap in Saw X is the same concept as the wax trap from the last movie, Spiral. It's not just Saw references though. If you pause at 3124, there is an Amogus reference graffitied on the wall. It even has the first 3 letters, AMO. Although in reality, instead of one imposter among a genuine crew, it's a crew of imposters and one genuine cancer patient. Earlier I mentioned that Saw X has elements of both of Kevin Grucher's previous Saw movies, the healthcare angle from Saw 6, but also the idea of punishing a liar or a faker from Saw 7.
In ancient Egypt, if you were speaking under oath, you were required to say, "If I'm lying, take me to the quarries." That mean anything to you?
The main trial in that one revolves around Bobby Dagan, an author who wrote a book about his experience surviving one of John's twisted games. Only, it was completely made up. Bobby was lying about being tested by Jigsaw, so John arranged for him to go through a series of torture devices, and the finale was the very experience Bobby made up in his book.
Dang it, Bobby.
The traps in Saw X used the exact same concept. The so-called physician staged a fake surgery, so he forced them to perform real surgical procedures on themselves to survive. Valentina is introduced as a nurse who will draw John's blood, so he makes her draw quite a bit of her own blood by cutting off her own leg using a surgical saw known as the Jigsaw. As a side note, I love how we're making our way through the compendium of different types of saws, whether it be hacksaw, circle saw, buzzsaw, power saw, or now Jigsaw. I think one of the few ones that hasn't been used yet, ironically, is a jigsaw. The next test subject is Mateo. He has to perform a craniotomy on himself and place a piece of his cerebral tissue in the vial to win. This is the procedure that they were supposed to be doing on John, and Mateo was supposed to be the anesthesiologist, but obviously that never really happened, so he's forced to play the game under the same conditions.
The only thing I have not provided is your anesthetic, but trust me, you will want to remain alert.
The tools needed for this are wheeled out by Jigsaw's avatar, Billy the Puppet. And the fact that Billy the Puppet is in Mexico can only mean that Amanda brought him. So she either drove 37 hours from New Jersey or shipped it to John and then met him there. Cause I know that thing didn't make it through TSA without raising some serious red flags. We never hear the explanation for Gabriella's game. She's forced to undergo radiation therapy, which is what John had to do at the beginning, but she's overexposed to it, and it's basically cooking her alive. She has to smash her foot and hand with a mallet to escape the shackles, which is also how Detective Eric Matthews escaped in Saw 3.
Brutality!
And speaking of brutality, the last traps are the bloodboarding trap and the gas chamber trap. The bloodboarding machine is designed for 2 people. Each of them can pull a lever to relieve the other from the torture. The people being tested here are Cecilia and her boyfriend Parker, the masterminds behind the fake surgery scam. But they are not the ones being bloodboarded. All they had to do was take mercy on John and Amanda and let them go without trying to reclaim the money that they'd finagled, which is sitting in the room upstairs. Instead, they force John and an innocent kid into the bloodboarding trap and try to make off with the money, which activates the gas room and deactivates the bloodboarding. I think there are a number of possible ways that this could have gone. Parker could have taken control and forced Cecilia into the trap with John. Cecilia could have taken the gun and forced Parker into the trap with John. And Cecilia and Parker could have forced John and Amanda into the trap.
But if you were the last player, who was supposed to be on the other side of that plank with you?
I'm guessing John had accounted for any of these scenarios, but did not account for Cecilia putting an innocent kid into the trap instead of Amanda. Personally, I find this plot to be on pretty shaky footing. I mean, the whole thing relies on luring Parker to the chemical factory where the game was taking place by leaving a cell phone in the room and allowing Cecilia to get it and call Parker for help. But how did Parker find out where they were? And how did John know Cecilia wouldn't just call the police first? But this plot oversight looks tiny in comparison to the other plot holes and plot craters that would follow. One recurring element in the film was the symbol of eyes. The nightclub that Gabriella visits before she's kidnapped features eye graffiti on the mirror, on the walls, and there's even the Spanish phrase ojitos, which translates to little eyes. Then, of course, there's the trap that John daydreams about at the beginning, the eye vacuum. Eyes are typically a symbol of being watched. I think back to the episode that I did on the Purge TV series. That city was also covered in eye graffiti as a symbol for government surveillance. I think the eye motif in this movie exists for similar reasons. John monitors the game through the use of cameras, and if you've seen my Jigsaw horror history episode, then you know all about how he makes himself out to be like a religious figure, punishing the sinners who do not appreciate their lives by putting them into these traps. He's very theatrical about all of his games because he wants the world to take notice. He wants people to live their lives to the fullest out of fear that they're always being watched by Jigsaw. And true to his word, the surveillance that he and his disciples do uncovers some other crimes outside of con artistry. But if you don't understand Spanish, then you might not find out about them. In fact, as far as I can tell, no version of this movie provides proper translations for the conversations in Spanish. The closed captions literally just say "speak Spanish," which is the laziest shit ever. Seeing "speak Spanish" in the captions has the same energy as this Brian with a Y coffee cup. Anyway, I painstakingly translated them. In Valentina's kidnapping sequence, this guy comes up and asks her if she wants to go somewhere more fun, and she accepts. They go to the car, but then she asks for money. He's confused, and she informs him, without money, there is no sex. So her secondary crime is prostitution. Which, side note, why would you sell yourself if you just got done ripping a guy off for $250K? I understand that number goes down because it's split between the 6 of them, but it's later stated that there were 38 victims over the course of 8 years. By my math, she's still making over $200,000 a year on a Mexico City budget. Mateo, on the surface, appears to have a more legitimate job as a janitor at a dog shelter, but his scene also reveals some shady activity. At the end of the night, he asks his coworkers if they left food for him, and they say yes. Seems innocent enough, until Gabriella comes in, and he calls her a bad word and tells her to get another distributor. So he's a dealer and she's an addict, and we know how Jigsaw feels about drugs. On that note, I actually think my favorite part of Saw X was seeing the beginning stages of Amanda's character arc that would complete in Saw 3. If you'll recall, Saw 3 was Amanda's final test to see if she could give victims a fair chance to win their games instead of just punishing them. She has the same attitude here, and John tries to guide her with his principle of giving them a chance to rehabilitate themselves.
That lady doctor deserves nothing.
Everyone deserves a chance.
And John says that much more calmly than he did with Hoffman in Saw 5.
Everybody deserves a chance.
An added wrinkle in Saw X is that she also has to come to terms with the fact that John is dying, which is kind of like another test for her. In Saw 3, Amanda's fatal flaw was making her traps unwinnable. Ironically, in my opinion, John's traps in Saw X are pretty unfair to the test subjects. In the first one, Valentina cuts off her leg before the timer expires, but because it takes a little bit longer to drain her bone marrow, she loses and she gets killed. Let's not forget that Dr. Gordon did the exact same thing a month ago. He cut off his foot after the time expired, and John still let him live. To make matters worse, every trap in the factory game is like this. Mateo accomplishes his task with a full 25 seconds to spare, but the chemical reaction takes too long and he's killed. Gabriella passes her test, but John and Amanda stand idle as Cecilia kills her, even though they know full well that the gun that they're being held up with has been loaded with duds. The John Kramer I know is a deranged psychopath, but he wouldn't let that happen because he thinks that he's doing the right thing. My guess is that he didn't want Parker to figure out that the gun was sabotaged. If Parker had tried to shoot it and it didn't do anything, then they'd still be in a situation where Parker and Cecilia are stronger than John and Amanda. But this is John Kramer we're talking about. He's always supposed to have a backup plan. The scammers weren't necessarily the smartest either. I mean, why would you go so far as to have Diego wear a fake beard to sell the part of the doctor, but then have everyone use their real names in front of the guy that they're scamming? I also have to ding them for how many times they asked to be let go.
I beg you, please.
Please don't do this. Please, John. Please. Please, 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 help me.
At some point, you just have to accept that it's not gonna happen. And while I'm in rant mode, does anyone else find it pretty stupid that they made a point to have John say that he sent the payment via wire transfer?
Dr. Peterson, just so you know, I'll wire the second half of the payment tomorrow morning.
But then, when it's convenient for the plot, this has been switched to a bag of cash. But despite all of those complaints, one thing that I do feel they got right was the epilogue. At the end, John grabs his notebook again. Earlier, we had seen him throw out his plans for the rack. It was like being cured of cancer had cured his anger, and he no longer felt the need to test subjects. But this experience brought back his cynical worldview, which kind of proves that he wasn't really fully testing people to help them overcome something. The last shot before the credits roll is Jigsaw opening the door and the light pouring in, which is the opposite of how these movies usually end, with someone closing a door to shut the victims into the darkness. Since John was a player in his own trap this time, I think this represents a new beginning for him. Usually, closing the door means game over, but John is opening the door to the final chapter of his life, which would consist of the upcoming events of Saw 2 and Saw 3, and maybe Saw 11. If you're interested in my analysis on that, make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell, and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.